screen feed that doesn't have a studio, so I can hear the interviews. Graham. Could you ask the studio if I can get screen feed without the director, so I can actually listen to the interview? Because I suspect at some point we're going to be talking about what we said in the interview. Thank you.
Yeah, you want to see it?
John Maguire, thanks very much indeed there. John Maguire with Steve Baker confirming his interest in standing for the leadership. I'm joined by Nick Irving, who's going to join in a minute. I just want to bring you the reaction from the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, who said on Twitter that the Conservatives have overseen 12 years of economic stagnation, finding public services promises we don't need to take the story at the top. We need a proper change of government. We need a fresh start for Britain. He says it is good news for the country that Boris Johnson has resigned as Prime Minister. It should have happened long ago. He was always unfit for office. He's been responsible for lies, scandal, fraud on an industrial scale. All those who have been complicit should be utterly ashamed. He goes on, the Tory party will inflict chaos upon the country during the worst cost of living crisis in decades, and they cannot now pretend that they're the ones to sort it out. They've been about 12 years. The damage they've done is profound. Economic stagnation, running public services, empty businesses, enough is enough.
Yes,
we don't need to chase the joy at the top. A proper change of government. Nick Erdley is with me now. Just to confirm where we are, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister,
a lot of the government Boris Johnson required, actually, including
tell us all about resigning and making the Conservative government the state's Prime Minister
enjoyment against the likely returns.
Minister.
Yes, again, my honourable friend makes an important point, and the White Paper will be looking at those issues, and of course the Gambling Commission looks at those kind of issues on an ongoing basis. He's raising again very important points about targeting, and in particular the most vulnerable in society. It's something we're very aware of.
Caroline Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One could be forgiven for failing to notice a news article yesterday regarding number 10 policy advisors who have links to gambling companies. What would be unforgivable if either of those advisors had in any way attempted to influence the White Paper in a way that could be considered to favour the industry. Can the Secretary of State ensure this House that that is not the case?
Minister.
Yeah, the Honourable Lady will be aware, and I do appreciate her passion and commitment in this. We've had many conversations. She will be very aware that we have engaged extensively with stakeholders during the course of the gambling review.
Boris Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the government does publish the White Paper, which I very much look forward to, will they ensure that the issue of affordability is made clear as to who the responsibility for it will be? Will it be the government or will it be the Gambling Commission?
Minister.
Yeah. Again, I can't preempt the conclusions of the review, but he's making an important point, and I say this is something that the Secretary of State in particular is very aware of, and we'll be communicating more in due course. The point of affordability is a really important one.
Secretary of State, Lucy.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I'm not surprised at all to see the Secretary of State still in her place. I had no doubt whatsoever that she would be the last woman standing supporting the Prime Minister while all around her collapses, including her own ministerial team. I did wonder, though, Mr Speaker, whether by this morning not only would she hold all the ministerial offices in her own department, but several other cabinet posts as well by this morning. But anyway, for many months we've heard the gambling white paper is imminent. It's still not been published, although its content has once again been trailed to the newspapers. Apparently, ministers are dropping the gambling levy, which has widespread support, and other measures which will bring the analogue gambling regulation into the digital age. Is this true?
Minister.
No.
Lucy Powell.
Well, we now know from the former gambling minister that the white paper is now with number 10 for sign-off. Well, good luck with that. We've also been promised the media bill, the white paper on football regulation, a review of women's football, a review on the future funding of the BBC, and a data bill, all before the summer recess. How is that going? I think the truth is we've got chaos, paralysis and a total collapse of government, with huge swathes of vacant ministerial posts and parliamentary business on hold. Isn't the reality that it's not just the Prime Minister who has lost the trust of the country, but the entire Conservative Party?
I would say this is about the gambling review, and the question should be about that. So if you want to answer on the gambling review.
Sounded good in the mirror.
Again, I hope the Honourable Lady will await as responding to the gambling review. I appreciate her giving a comprehensive list of all the policy areas and manifesto commitments that this government is committed to delivering on. She could have gone much further as well and mentioned safe standing and indeed the delivery, for example, of the Commonwealth Games starting in 3 weeks' time, or the Euros, and well done Lionesses last night. Thank you for her giving a list of this government's achievements.
Also, don't want the Minister to wander off on somewhere else. Let's have somebody who's going to put us right back on track. Minister. John Nettleson, SNP Sport.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, in what could well be our last exchange across the dispatch box, I recognise that the Secretary of State cannot bind the hands of her successor, but as we move away from post-truth politics and culture wars, can she leave doing some good? The lottery is the country's principal gambling addiction. For most, it's innocent fun. For some, it's a problem, an affliction. The now resigned Tech and Digital Minister confirmed to my honourable friend at Select Committee this week that tickets can be charged perfectly legally to credit cards, building up huge debts. When Camelot is replaced, can this be reformed?
Minister.
Again, I thank the honourable gentleman for his final part of his comments in terms of drawing attention to the fact that we do constantly review the lottery. Indeed, we have made significant changes over time, including age limits, for example, for who can play the lottery. And as he's aware, you can use a credit card if it's along with other shopping. That's the norm in many other countries as well, but we constantly review these exact areas.
John Spiller.
Number 5, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Mr Speaker. In 2019, the last full year of gambling data unaffected by COVID, the gambling industry contributed £8.3 billion to the economy, or 0.4% of GVA. The sector employs approximately 98,000 people and pays £2 billion a year in gambling duties. According to the British Horse Racing Authority, racing has direct revenues in excess of £1.47 billion and makes a total annual contribution to the UK economy of over £4 billion.
Speller.
Yes, can I thank refer to my entry in the register and thank the Minister for that comprehensive reply, and urge him in preparing the white paper to take a balanced view of the economic and social benefits and the considerable pleasure for millions who bet quite responsibly, and also the great contribution to the exchequer, and balance that against maybe the very vocal lobby, particularly in some of the media, of those who basically with gambling are prohibitionists.
Minister.
Again, I can assure the honourable gentleman that the gambling white paper itself was comprehensive. The response will be comprehensive. We've taken evidence and information from across the entire sector, and therefore views such as his representative were absolutely taken into account during the consideration.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Number 6, please.
Minister.
Sorry, question 6. Oh yes, sorry. Yes, the honourable lady will be aware that just last week, actually, we announced a review into this very area. It's vitally important as well, in particular in tourism-affected areas of the country. And I know her city, which I've had the pleasure of visiting, is indeed one of them.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Short-term holiday lets and Airbnb are blighting my city. We have nearly 2,000. It's undermining the regulated B&B and guest house sector. It's taking away houses from people in my city desperately to get homes, but it's also causing antisocial behaviour and party houses on residential streets. Will he ensure that the government introduce a licensing system as opposed to a registration scheme, and also enable local authorities to create areas where there are no Airbnbs? And will he meet with me to discuss the crisis we're currently facing?
Yes, I'm always delighted to meet the Honourable Lady. She raises some important points, really articulating precisely why it is that we brought in the need for the review, because some of the issues she raised we're very aware of. Now, some of the individual entities, such as Airbnb and so on, are already taking action on areas like antisocial behaviour and the number of people who can be in parties. We expect and require them actually to continue to be responsible and responsive to their customers and indeed local communities. We haven't preempted the conclusions of the review, though, so please, I ask her to please contribute to that review.
Come on.
The Honourable Lady is absolutely right to identify the issue that she has in York and in other parts of the country. But will my honourable friend also bear in mind that these lets generate income for the area too? And many restaurants and other places would probably go out of business were it not for some of these lets.
There we are.
Yeah, the honourable gentleman is making an important point, and that's why it is a call for evidence. It's information. We have not come to conclusions or indeed decisions about potential legislation, because there is a balance to be had here. Many people rent out a spare room, and in particular in these straitened times, actually it's very important that they can get additional revenue where they can.
Kevin Brown.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With the announcement just now that the Prime Minister has resigned as the leader of the Conservative Party, will his temporary occupation of number 10 Downing Street over the summer qualify as a short-term holiday let?
Yeah, I'm sure the honourable gentleman enjoying himself. That is nonsense, but I think the important thing to make very, very clear, as you can see today, government continues.
Greg Whittaker.
Question number 8, Mr Speaker.
Minister, or is it Secretary?
Yeah, sorry. Society lotteries are a vital source of funds for charities and other organisations, raising hundreds of millions of pounds every year. Sales and prize limits were last increased in 2020. A review after 12 months, published in March, concluded that the reforms were starting to benefit the sector, but more evidence was needed before making further changes, and we'll work with the Gambling Commission to keep this under review.
For that answer, but as the Minister rightly said, charities lotteries such as the People's Postcode Lottery are benefiting thousands of charities and communities around the country, not least in the Calder Valley itself, and implementing the next stage of the charity lottery reform, as the government have previously said they will do, is a great way to help take forward the levelling up agenda at no cost to the public purse. So will the Minister agree to look further at this and implement that review sooner rather than later?
Minister.
Yes, absolutely. We will keep this under review, because the government did express an ambition to look again at increasing the annual sales limit to £100 million. Once we were satisfied that this would result in overall returns to good causes increasing and would not negatively impact on the National Lottery. And that goal of making sure that the returns to good causes are optimised will be front of our minds.
Smith.
Number 9, please, Mr Speaker.
So stay.
Mr Speaker. Through Project Gigabit, we are ensuring that hard-to-reach areas of the UK can gain access to world-class gigabit connectivity, alongside delivering gigabit broadband to the rest of the country ahead of the demand. As I said in an earlier answer, in 2019 we stood at 6%. Today that figure is at 69%.
Nick Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Rolling out gigabit broadband requires real leadership. The Prime Minister has brought his office into disrepute. So will the Deputy Prime Minister be his standby this summer?
Sarah Stare, I'm not quite sure it's relevant.
Yeah, I'm afraid that question does not relate to gigabit broadband rollout.
Chair of the Select Committee, Judy Knight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I was originally going to ask on the Commonwealth Games, obviously a fantastic event for the West Midlands, but I wish to focus on something else that's very good news in my locality. Will the Minister join me in congratulating Solihull Council, Solihull Community Housing and City Fibre in striking a deal to ensure that 4,000 community housing tenants are given the very latest full fibre network? And does the Minister agree with me that whatever we have, a rollout programme in towns, cities, villages across the country, that everyone is covered in those localities, so we leave no one behind as we finally strive to join the first rank of connected nations?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for the work that he continually contributes to this area and as his chair of the Select Committee. But he's absolutely right. In fact, the manifesto commitment was 100% for a reason, and it was 100%, and this is the Prime Minister's absolute commitment that nobody would be left behind. Obviously, there are hard-to-reach and difficult-reach-to areas, including hill farms and others in the more rural parts of the country, but there are innovative ways using 5G and satellite and other ways of getting that connectivity to those areas, and that is being worked on right now, and we continue, and this government will not rest until 100% has been reached.
Number 11, Mr. Speaker. Or this one.
It's 11. It's 11. I need you to answer. Anybody want it? It's 11.
He's resigned again.
No. Who's doing question 11?
Sorry, I didn't hear the honourable lady ask the question. Only 97.5% of premises in England and 95% in Worcestershire can access superfast broadband of at least 30 Mbps. We are now bringing forward investment of £5 billion through Project Gigabit to provide gigabit connectivity to premises across the UK that are not covered through the commercial delivery. We have already provided gigabit coverage to 600,000 premises in areas that previously only had low speeds. We are aiming to commence procurement for gigabit coverage in Worcestershire between September and November of this year.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The figures that I got from the House of Commons Library for West Worcestershire say that 9% of my constituency is still not covered. And the reason is that it's very cumbersome to put together the groups of people with vouchers to make a scheme viable. And then they're very vulnerable to someone withdrawing their voucher at the last minute. Could the Secretary of State look at ways to improve this so that we can have someone underwriting and strengthening the delivery of this important service to rural areas?
I thank my honourable friend for her question. And so hundreds of premises in rural areas across my honourable friend's constituency, which I know well, have received gigabit cable connections through the voucher scheme, but as she says, there are some fragilities to that. We will be bringing forward our Project Gigabit procurement for suppliers to provide coverage to premises not covered by the commercial providers or where vouchers are not the most effective approach. Alongside this, we've introduced voucher priority areas, as we know that in some instances suppliers are able to deliver faster thanks to their participation in the voucher scheme. I'll just reiterate what I said to a previous answer. It was never going to be 100% overnight, but to have gone from 6% to 69% across the UK in 3 years, I think is pretty remarkable, and that progress continues at pace.
Sean Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State, sorry. The level of change at the moment is hard to keep track. The Secretary of State refers to the Prime Minister's, the current Prime Minister's, I presume, commitment that no one be left behind. But she knows very well that under successive Conservative governments, the absence of a digital inclusion strategy means that a digital divide has broadened, whether it be between rural and urban, or between those who have the digital skills and those who don't, or those who can afford broadband or those who can't. The last digital inclusion strategy was in 2014. When will a new one appear?
So that's just, I'm sorry, but the progress with which we have commenced the rollout of gigabit broadband across the UK has been exemplary. And I would say, Mr. Speaker, that just last week I held a round table with telecommunications providers to urge them to look at social tariffs, to offer lower rates to those people who are left behind and can't afford the rates that others can afford. And work never stops in this area. We're very aware of those who can't access broadband, who can't have digital access.
I'm very lucky to have 7 heritage railways in Dwyfor Meirionnydd, and steam engines were designed to run on coal, and they're now facing a crisis. Question number 12. Yeah.
The government absolutely appreciates the unique importance of the heritage steam railways in this country, promoting our industrial heritage and supporting tourism. We're in regular communication with the industry.
I was trying to use time to best effect. As I was saying, there are 7 heritage railways I'm very lucky to have in Dwyfor Meirionnydd, and steam engines were designed to run on coal. They are now facing a crisis in the supply of suitable coal following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The sector is working to develop alternatives to coal as required by the net zero agenda, but they need help. Will he commit to support heritage steam to ensure the survival of our industrial heritage?
Yes, I thank the Honourable Lady. We've had several conversations about this topic, as indeed colleagues have across the House. I understand the complexities and the challenges. She'll be aware that some of the issues in order to resolve may be outside of DCMS's portfolio. And of course, ultimately, this is a commercial arrangement in terms of sourcing fuel supplies. However, I would be happy to continue to work with the Honourable Lady and facilitate further conversations across government.
Topicals, Robert Logan.
Topical number 1, sir.
Mr. Speaker, in the last few weeks we've seen huge crowds at Her Majesty's Platinum Jubilee, Glastonbury, Silverstone and Wimbledon. The Women's Euros kicked off last night and the Birmingham Commonwealth Games are on their way. It's set to be a great British summer of culture and sport. Speaking of sport, last week I was lucky enough to attend an event celebrating the upcoming Rugby League World Cup. I know the Speaker is a huge fan of the sport, and I know that while I don't share his detailed expertise, I know that he will be delighted that Rugby League's execs have told me, and Mr. Speaker as well, I believe, that Rugby League has never had so much publicity and so much attention for the game. And so all I can say, Mr. Speaker, is you're welcome.
I think you did a great job for Rugby League. We certainly got it promoted. Robert Lagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government deserves considerable credit for its recent announcement to allow safe standing in all Premier League grounds. However, the rule change does not permit for seat locking for safe standing, which is essential if we're going to be able to increase capacity and provide cheaper ticket prices like we see in countries like Germany, which is what the overwhelming majority of fans want to see when we talk about safe standing. So will the Secretary of State agree to meet with me, officials from the FA, officials from the English Premier League and colleagues from the all-party parliamentary group for safe standing so we can discuss this issue and get on and...
So I want to assure the honourable member that the safety of spectators at football matches was the key priority in the development of this policy. The report did find that keeping seats unlocked would offer greater choice to spectators, which was supported by the data from the Spectator Survey. But of course, always happy to meet and discuss this further.
Minister Jeff Smith.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, it does look as though the Secretary of State will shortly have a lot more spare time on her hands, perhaps for more sport and physical activity. But that's much harder if leisure facilities and swimming pools close because of high fuel costs and reduced footfall. Operators are really worried. So what more will the government do to support local authorities and the rest of the sector as they face this Tory cost of living crisis?
Secretary of State.
So, Mr. Speaker, throughout the pandemic, the sectors were support £100 million to the leisure sector throughout the pandemic. We continue to work with and to discuss ongoing issues with that particular sector, but I'm delighted to see that we're seeing improvements across all sectors in terms of leisure.
Whittingdale.
My right honourable friend will be aware that yesterday was British IP Day, and that the creative industries for which she is responsible rely upon intellectual property protection. Is she aware of the deep concern across the creative industries about proposals to dilute copyright for artificial intelligence, and will she raise this urgently with her colleagues in the Department of Business?
Well, I thank my honourable friend both for his question, but his continued support, both for the department and myself. Last week, we published our response to the consultation on intellectual property and artificial intelligence, of which I'm sure he's aware. Following this consultation, we intend to amend copyright law to make it easier to analyse material for the purposes of machine learning, research and innovation. This will promote the use of AI technology and wider data mining techniques for the public good.
Tony Lloyd.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, you will know that the bulk of the nation's cultural treasures are held in London, and many of them don't see the light of day from one year to the next, and not even to be seen by people with access in the South East. So what will the Secretary of State do to make sure that the nation's cultural treasures are spread amongst the nations and the regions?
So, Mr. Speaker, this has been an objective of mine since I first arrived in the department. And yesterday I visited the British Library, which holds many of the nation's treasures, which getting both libraries, museums, art galleries to ensure that their collections reach across the country so that everybody has access and can see and enjoy and learn from those national treasures. And the one thing that I will say is that I've asked every organisation, both from the beginning and recently, to look again at what they're doing to make sure this happens.
My right honourable friend has already said that the penetration of high-speed broadband has gone up in just 3 years from 6% to 69%, and particularly so in rural areas. But is my right honourable friend aware that actually in parts of Westminster, for example, and Birmingham, actually it is very, very slow? What can we do to speed up urban broadband?
No more so. There's some comments. Come on.
Well, I'm sure that Mr. Speaker has a response on Westminster, but as of July 22, London has 81% gigabit coverage. It's an urban area. It's easier to cover and easier to reach homes. Birmingham is at 93%. That is up from just 14% and 21% respectively from November 2019.
York is ambitious to make it onto the UNESCO World Heritage Site tentative list. We will certainly display so many factors of our assets of heritage, but also our social history, encouraging inbound tourism to the UK. However, it's a very expensive process. What support will her department give to support cities like York make it onto that tentative list?
Yes, indeed. We are, of course, looking at the long list of potential future bids for UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Many people would be surprised that York is not already on the list for many of the reasons she's outlined. I'd be happy to have a conversation with her. I don't think there's an expectation of financial support, but we should be able to provide support and advice.
Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Secretary of State knows, we have some fantastic canals and waterways in this country. Many are historic and need protecting. The fantastic volunteers at the North Walsham and Dilham Canal Trust in my constituency do an incredible job. Can I ask what discussions she has had with the Secretary of State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs on supporting this country's historic canals and waterways?
Secretary of State.
So DEFRA is working with the Canal and River Trust on the current review of the government's annual grant funding for the Trust as required by the 2012 grant agreement. But the UK's historic canals and waterways represent some of the finest examples of working industrial heritage in the world. They play an important role in the wider visitor economy and as a valuable green space for local communities. Due to this unique social, cultural and economic importance, the Canal and River Trust, an independent charity, benefited from £3.2 million.
Mr. Speaker, the government recently introduced a dual registration scheme to support touring trucks, as touring was completely forgotten during the Brexit negotiations. Although we don't have a minister for this area, will somebody be able to tell me how orchestras who own their own vehicles and do not benefit from scheme, or small-scale operators, will be able to operate in this area and help our creative industries?
Secretary of State.
I thank my friend for the question. A huge amount of work has gone into touring, as I think he knows, and I'm sure he'll be delighted to welcome the announcement by Greece just very recently to open up its, along with Spain and others, to open up and to allow our musicians and our artisans to tour across the EU. There are negotiations taking place on a daily basis, and problems are being resolved as we move forward. You know, we opened up our...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Hillingdon Outdoor Activity Centre at Hayfield in my constituency has given generations of children the opportunity to experience new sports. What plans does my right honourable friend have to ensure that more children can benefit from these opportunities in the future?
Yes.
The government encourages everyone, no matter what their age, to be as active as they can. We recognise that outdoor activity centres provide opportunities for all members of society to be active. Outdoor activity centres were supported through the pandemic by the government assistance, such as the furlough scheme, and there is a range of programmes including the National Citizen Service and the £80 million Green Recovery Challenge Fund, whose delivery partners include outdoor activity centres.
Boris Sherman.
Speaker, I know the Secretary of State to be a great survivor. If she does survive, will she look again at this terrible war she has against public service broadcasting, Channel 4 and the BBC?
I'm disappointed at my honourable friend's question. We've worked together for 7 to 18 years. I'm disappointed at that question. I have no war. I have two objectives. One is to ensure that both Channel 4 and the BBC survive and they're fit for the ever-changing broadcasting landscape that we face. May I just say, with the greatest of respect, we need to be aware of how that landscape is changing at warp speed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As mentioned, the Commonwealth Games are fast approaching, allowing athletes from Wales to display their proud individualism under our great union. Would my honourable friend join me in congratulating and wishing Jacob Young from Olympus Gymnastics in Wrexham all the best as he represents Team Wales.
From Redcar.
Absolutely delighted to wish Jacob Young the best of luck. Of course, the nations compete separately in the Commonwealth Games, so there is an England, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales dynamic that we don't have in the Olympics, but I wish all nations the best of luck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State was very upbeat in her response to my honourable friend from the front bench of Manchester Withington about local authority leisure centres. They're under financial distress because of the rising costs of energy, particularly those that run swimming pools. So is she saying that they are safe for the future? And if so, can she say how she's securing that?
Mr. Speaker, the cost of living challenge in terms of energy costs, which we're all facing across all sectors, is a problem that the government is addressing. On his particular issue, as I said, we did support the leisure sectors throughout the pandemic. Conversations are taking place with the sectors as to the problems that they face and solutions that the government can help to find.
We now come to questions to the Attorney General, and I start with Tony Lloyd. Sir Tony Lloyd.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Attorney General, when we cleared the House.
Mr. Speaker, before I answer question one, may I just take this opportunity to pay tribute to the superb honourable member for Cheltenham. He was quite simply an excellent Solicitor General who took the difficult decision to resign from government this week. He was an absolute honour and pleasure to work with him, a brilliant lawyer, a dedicated Member of Parliament, and a shining example of the highest standards of public service. Mr. Speaker, victims are not spectators, and they have the right to be informed of their case and to be supported. That is why the government is increasing funding for victim and witness support services to £192 million by 24-25, which represents an uplift of 92% on core budgets in 2021. And a large proportion of that funding has been allocated to police and crime commissioners to commission local victim support services. And for 22-23, the Ministry of Justice allocated about £5.2 million to the Greater Manchester PCC to support services.
Johnny Lloyd.
Mr. Speaker, I'm bound to welcome any extra resources to support victims, but nevertheless, the victims and, where appropriate, families of victims are still treated in an appalling fashion in too many cases. Trials that don't come to cases that don't come to court, trials that are cracked, all of the things that go wrong give the victims the impression that they are simply an adjunct to the process. What's the attorney seriously going to do about that?
Attorney General.
Well, I think the government has already acted in a significant way to put victims front and centre of our criminal justice system so that justice is secured for them. And for 2021-22, the Ministry has provided £150 million for victim and witnesses alone, whether that's more ISVAs who are game-changing in the victim experience. I've spoken to victims myself and they've told me personally how transformative the presence of an ISVA can be in their experience through the criminal justice system, or whether it's £20 million for local community-based sexual violence and domestic abuse services. I'm very proud of the track record of this government on supporting victims.
Chair of the Select Committee, Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And may I thank the attorney and join her in her tribute to my honourable and learned friend, the member for Cheltenham, whose service was absolutely outstanding and exceptional, and who departed his post with great honour and with the respect, I think, of this House and of the profession and the judiciary. Can I thank her for what she has said about victims? It is clear that the government has done a great deal. I'm sure she will be aware, however, too, in the course, for example, of our pre-legislative scrutiny of the Draft Victims Bill, which is welcome, the Select Committee has heard evidence that, as was said by the Right Honourable Gentleman opposite, although there is good work, there is still patchiness of provision for victims' service in many areas. The Draft Victims Bill gives a real opportunity to improve that and ensure a much more consistent approach. And can I ask from her the undertaking that the government will look with care at the recommendations that we make as a result of that past legislative scrutiny?
Well, my honourable friend makes a very important point about the forthcoming Victims Bill, and I'm very proud that this government is introducing specific measures to transform the victim experience of the criminal justice system. That bill will pursue measures to improve victims' experiences, and it looks at what more can be done to ensure that the victim's voice is heard both pre and post-charge. I'm very proud in particular of the code, the Victims Code that came into force last year, a real reflection of our commitment to victims.
Shadow Attorney General Emily Thornbury.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I say what an honour it is to be at this dispatch box facing the next Prime Minister as she waits her call from the palace. A true honour, although colleagues will have noticed in her list of leadership priorities last night, the Attorney-General had absolutely nothing to say about tackling the epidemic of crime in our country or ending the culture of law-breaking in our government, both of which have flourished under her watch. But what she did say last night is that we need to shrink the size of the state. So can I ask the Attorney-General a very simple question? In percentage terms, what size of staffing cuts does she plan to make to the Crown Prosecution Service, and what that will mean for record backlogs that are currently facing our courts?
Attorney General.
I know the Right Honourable loves to degrade this question sessions to petty politics. I'm not going to lower myself to her standards. I'm here to talk about victims and what we're doing to secure justice for vulnerable people. I'm very proud of the financial settlement that this government has put into the CPS, increasing the number of prosecutors. And notably, there have been in the last 12 months alone 115 more RASO-trained prosecutors in place to work specifically to support victims.
We now come to SNP spokesperson Emma Lawson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the Scottish Government is investing an extra £4 million this year in victim services to tackle violence against women and girls and offer greater support for victims' needs. And the Crown Office budget in Scotland is over 40% higher than at the start of the last Parliament, supporting a range of improvements and modernisation processes. Does the Attorney-General welcome this? Does she agree more funding should be made available across the UK for greater access to justice for victims? And will she consider putting it in her Prime Ministerial manifesto?
Well, the Honourable Lady again raises good points here, but I think we've seen a sea change over the last 2 years when it comes to what the government has been doing to tackle violence against women and girls, whether it's increased amounts of data. We now have localised data dashboards or scorecards to shine a light on how different areas around the country are performing in terms of RASO, but also on all crime and how they're recovering from COVID. We we also have, as I say, I'm very proud of this Victims Code, which contains 12 rights for victims. This is going to be enshrined in statute, a right for victims to get referred to the relevant support services, a right for victims to have access to the relevant information, a right for victims to make a personal statement in court. Those are meaningful changes that this government has introduced. I'm very proud of that.
Craig Williams.
Number 2, Mr. Speaker.
I visited CPS Wales in February of this year, and I was very pleased to speak to the hard-working and dedicated prosecutors there about their work, and which was also praised in the recent report from the CPS Inspectorate. I know the Honourable Member had a productive meeting with the Chief Crown Prosecutor for Wales recently, and I hope that he will join me in commending the area for their very strong performance in terms of recovery from the backlog.
Can I thank the Attorney General for that answer, and it's good to see her in her place. Can I also pay tribute to Jenny Hopkins, the Chief Crown Prosecutor for Wales? As the Attorney General alluded to, I met her, and her team are doing a terrific job. But the court backlog in mid-Wales, rural Wales, is still quite spectacular. Can I ask the Attorney General what support she is bringing to bear to support that problem?
Attorney General.
The data which we now have access to in an unprecedented fashion actually shows that when it comes to recovery from the backlog and from COVID and court backlogs, CPS Wales and the Wales Criminal Justice Board in that area has actually performed exceptionally well. There's been a huge amount of resource put into court recovery, and that's why the Magistrates' Court backlog in the CPS Wales area was the first to recover from the impact of COVID, with live caseload numbers falling to below pre-COVID levels in December 2021. For myself, I visited Wales and I successfully personally presented a case at the Cardiff Crown Court, at the Court of Appeal, which resulted in the attempted murderers of Stephen Gibbs having his sentence increased from 30 years to 20 years and 7 months imprisonment with an extended licence period of 5 years. I was delighted and honoured to be in court in Wales.
Scott Benson.
Question 3, Mr. Speaker.
Attorney General.
We are united in our combined efforts across government to improve performance for victims and increase the number of successful rape cases that go through our courts. And since we published our Rape Review Action Plan, there has been a steady increase in the number of rape charges, prosecutions and convictions quarter on quarter. We are closing the gap between complaints and convictions. Most notably, the number of convictions for rape offences are up by 27% compared to 2019.
I think the Attorney General's got to group.
Well, that was my collective answer to grouping of 3 and 7.
That's all I needed. That's great. Scott Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Lancashire, our brilliant Police and Crime Commissioner, Andrew Snowden, is funding a variety of projects to reduce rape and serious sexual offences. This includes dedicated specialist support services for victims and Operation Night Guardian, which focuses on the night economy. How is the CPS in Lancashire working alongside our Police and Crime Commissioner to improve the rates of conviction for these abhorrent crimes?
Attorney General.
My honourable friend is right. I'm pleased to report that CPS North West is an Operation Soteria area, which is an ambitious joint police and CPS programme of work to transform the way that rape prosecutions are handled, introduced very recently under this government. Operation Soteria will provide a renewed focus on investigating the suspect rather than the victim, and will ultimately create a new operating model for the investigation and prosecution of rape. And we are very pleased to be seeing the green shoots of progress nationally, with the number of rape convictions increasing by 29% compared to the last quarter pre-COVID.
Click Drummond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I have a constituent whose sperm was used by without his consent by his ex-partner so that she could become pregnant. The police have looked at the case and passed it to the CPS, who say that the law does not allow them to prosecute the offence as any kind of sexual assault. Can my right honourable friend look at the law, because it's not just sperm theft, but a form of sexual assault and a violation of his rights?
Attorney General.
Well, my thoughts are very much with my honourable friend's constituents, and this sounds like a very traumatic affair. And I want to thank her for raising this case. I know that she's already received a reply from my department setting out the reasons why the CPS could not proceed with this particular case. The CPS looked at all the facts of the case carefully and it considered all the available offences under current legislation before determining that no offence had been committed under the current law. I will raise the case with my colleagues in the Ministry of Justice so that they might look at the existing statutory framework.
Ruth Capron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since the Supreme Court reversed the Roe versus Wade judgment that a 10-year-old girl in Ohio who is pregnant as a result of rape has been forced to travel to Indiana from her home state for an abortion that she couldn't get locally. Will the Attorney General condemn the appalling cruelty that has and will result from the Supreme Court ruling? And will she also condemn the Conservative MPs who celebrated it on social media?
Attorney General.
I don't think it's the right of a UK government minister to comment on a judicial decision in another jurisdiction like the United States. And that is a matter for the United States Supreme Court and the United States Congress to resolve. What I'm focused on is the experience of victims in Britain and Wales and how we can improve our criminal justice system. And that's why I'm very proud of the achievements that we've secured. I'm very proud that, for example, the CPS prosecuted 430,000 defendants last year on a whole suite of offences, including 69 alleged terrorists, 33 of which were convicted. 19,000 serious violence offences were prosecuted. It has a conviction rate of almost 75%. These are the statistics and the facts and the policies with which I am focused.
Proud of her achievements when the delay between offence and completion in rape cases is now more than 1,000 days, and there are 50 UK Crown Courts with delays of over 3 years and 18 with delays of over 4 years. Does she agree with the Victims Commissioner that these delays are appalling? And could she possibly take time out from her leadership campaign to look at bringing in pre-recorded evidence and cross-examination in all rape cases in all Crown Courts now?
Attorney General.
Well, actually what we're seeing as a result of the pioneering operations like Soteria is a closer collaboration between police and prosecutor. What we know works is when a prosecutor has a good, clear case strategy, has grip of the case, and properly identifies the challenges. And the police are very supportive and involved in the investigation. Close collaboration, early investigative advice and support for the victim is what will cut down the timelines and to ensure that victims get justice in a swifter way. And that's why I'm very proud of Section 28 rollout.
The last time we debated this issue in this chamber, the Attorney General told me that any allegation of domestic abuse or sexual assault on victims is horrendous. On no account does anyone in this government condone that behaviour. So why did the Attorney General not call for the Prime Minister's resignation when she found out he'd turned a blind eye to an allegation of sexual assault by one of his own ministers, but did call for his resignation to launch her bizarre leadership campaign live on TV last night? Doesn't that just sum up how she's debased the office she holds and put political ambition before the rule of law?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman could have asked about domestic abuse of victims. He could have asked about RASO. He could have asked about crime prevention and keeping the British people safe. Instead, what he used his opportunity for was to score cheap political points
Order. The front bench should not be shouting after asking the question. Let's get this on and move on.
When it comes to domestic abuse, our landmark Domestic Abuse Act is strengthening protection for victims and ensuring that perpetrators feel the full force of the law. It includes the first legal definition of domestic abuse. It improves support for victims in the courts. It introduces new offences and strengthens the legislation precisely for victims of domestic abuse. It's a pity he didn't want to talk about that.
Question 4, Mr. Speaker.
Attorney General.
Oh, come on.
So rude.
Mr. Speaker, we published the review of disclosure and amended disclosure guidelines in May to deliver improvements for police and prosecutors and victims of crime. The new guidelines feature an annex on data protection, which will ease the burden on police handling of digital material. It will leave them more time to be on the streets fighting crime and investigating crime. And I'm very pleased with how they've been received by the profession throughout.
Neil Hamby.
Sorry.
Look after yourself. Sorry. Back to Mike Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What impact does the attorney expect her guidelines that she published in May to have on CPS decision making and on their prosecution of sex offences?
Attorney General.
My honourable friend raises a real priority for government, and these guidelines will mean, in effect, fewer unnecessary intrusions into a victim's private life and more interactions with victims to help them understand the process. All of that will mean that victims are more engaged, there is less attrition, and the process is swifter but just as effective. And it's just very unfortunate that some members of the Labour Party promoted an incorrect understanding of what these guidelines mean.
Question number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, there have been no prosecutions by either the Serious Fraud Office or the Crown Prosecution Service for frauds connected to COVID-19 contracts awarded by the Department for Health and Social Care. However, I can neither confirm nor deny whether the Serious Fraud Office are investigating any frauds related to those contracts. This government, Mr. Speaker, rightly took swift action at the height of the pandemic. And thanks to the excellent work of this government, including government lawyers, we have successfully defended the majority of our coronavirus-related litigation.
Mr. Speaker, the secrecy over VIP lane contracts is emblematic of the loss of trust and transparency in this government. And over the last 48 hours, MPs from the government benches have repeatedly stated the importance of integrity and honesty. So, as Prime Minister, will the Attorney-General finally lift the veil of secrecy, publish the full details of VIP lane contacts and refer the matter to the committee or authorities as necessary?
Attorney General.
Well, as I say, I mean, there has been a lot of COVID-related litigation through our courts, and there's been a lot of scrutiny on the decision-making and the actions that the government took during the pandemic. I'm very pleased to say that in the majority of those cases, the government was successful. Our decision-making was upheld and was found to be lawful.
Before I call Barry Sherman, I note that he wishes to raise a case of his late constituent, Ms Kathleen Dawson, who is the subject of an open and adjourned inquest. I'm exercising my discretion given to the Chair in relation to the matters which are introduced to allow the reference to the case as part of the question and answer. Barry Sherman.
Question number 8, Mr. Speaker.
Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I am aware of this tragic case of the honourable gentleman's in his constituency and that he has raised, and I want to take this opportunity to offer my deepest condolences to Caitlin's family and friends. And I want to thank him for his tireless campaigning over many years on all road safety issues. He's been a leader in this field. Like him, I recognise the devastating impact that fatal road traffic accidents and collisions can have on families and on victims. And that's why, under the Police, Crime and Sentencing and Courts Act, this government has increased the maximum penalty to life imprisonment for the offences of causing death by dangerous driving and causing death by careless driving when under the influence of drink or drugs. And last year, the CPS charged over 650 defendants in relation to fatal road traffic accidents, bringing the total number of charges back in line with pre-pandemic levels.
Speaker, I've been around long enough to be one of the people that introduced the seatbelt legislation and banned children from travelling unrestrained in cars. So I've been a member of this. I wasn't going to talk about specifics today, Mr. Speaker. You were very kind in your mention. I'm very worried, up and down the country, increasing number of families who have a member of their family killed by a driver,
And then, because a lot of people are able to hire a very expensive lawyer that can argue things like automatism, they weren't in control of their bodies or their faculties at the time of the accident, increasingly those lawyers are frightening the CPS into not prosecuting. That's my worry. Can we do something about it?
Attorney General.
It is tragic, and there are simply no words for the situation that he sets out. Ultimately, fairness sits at the heart of our justice system, and therefore the same threshold is used for all offences, whether deciding to prosecute fatal road traffic cases or murder, and that's set out in the Code for Crown Prosecutors and has remained the same since the CPS was formed in the 1980s. And that sets out a two-stage test with which many people here will be familiar. It will only proceed unless both stages of those tests are met. It is always comes down to the evidence and the public interest, and I'm very happy to talk to him about what more operationally or perhaps in the state of the law can be done to remedy the problem that he identifies.
Okay. That completes Attorney General questions. Before we start the urgent question, I wish to make a short statement. Clearly, this is a day when there are lots of important developments happening outside the chamber. The situation is fast-moving. However, it's important the House is kept informed of developments in a timely and authoritative way. There are legitimate questions requiring answers about the functioning of government over this turbulent period. That is why I have granted the UQ we're about to hear. I remind all members that conventions and courtesies are here for a purpose. They allow us to discuss the most important issues without resorting to personal attacks. That is why I encourage all members to remember our constituents are watching events closely. Let us focus on the big issues, not the personality. I now come to the Deputy Leader for the UQ, Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, for granting this very important UQ today to ask the Minister for the Cabinet Office if he will make a statement on the functioning of government.
Minister Ellis.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, as the House will be aware, it is widely reported that the Prime Minister is about to make an important statement shortly. I can confirm that it is correct that the Prime Minister will speak shortly. I cannot preempt the Prime Minister's statement, and the House and the nation will hear more imminently. In the meantime, the business of government continues, supported in the usual way by our excellent civil service. There will continue to be ministers of the Crown in place, including in all great offices of state. We must continue to serve our country, constituents, and the general public first and foremost. It is our duty now to make sure the people of this country have a functioning government. This is true now more than ever. The civil service is the foundation on which all governments function. The civil service continues to support across all government departments, and the country can be assured that this will always remain the case. I have spoken this morning to the Cabinet Secretary to that effect. Any transitional arrangements have always been made to allow for the business of government to continue. There are constitutional mechanisms in place to make sure that can happen. We await the Prime Minister's statement, but the House should be reassured that the government continues to function in the meantime. Any necessary ministerial vacancies can and will be filled. Other Secretaries of State can make decisions if necessary. There is a rich reserve of people who are both dedicated and talented, and who remain dedicated to serving our country and their constituents. Calmness and professionalism are now required. Our focus now is fully on the stability and continuity of government, Mr. Speaker. Now is the time to serve in the interests of our country, as it always is, and our constituents during the period ahead.
Angela Rayner.
I hate to break it to the Minister, but we don't have a functioning government. It will be good news for the country that the Prime Minister is to announce his resignation. He was always unfit for office. He has overseen scandal, fraud and waste on an industrial scale. But the chaos of the last 3 days is more than just petty Tory infighting. These actions, Mr Speaker, have serious consequences for the running of our country. In the middle of the deepest cost of living crisis of a generation, with families unable to make ends meet, a dangerous war in Europe threatening our borders and a possible trade crisis in Northern Ireland, Britain has no functioning government, no ministers in place to pass legislation, bill committees cancelled with no one to run them. Can the Minister confirm whether the 11 committees due to take place today will go ahead? Without ministers, what are the arrangements to pass primary and secondary legislation, and who will answer oral questions? How will this government continue to be democratically held to account? With the new Education Secretary resigning after 36 hours, which must be a record, there is not a single member in the Department of Education. What does this mean for children taking their exams? What does this mean for the impending childcare cost crisis? And our British national security is at risk too, not least because the Prime Minister thinks he can stay on. With the departure of the Northern Ireland Secretary, only 2 ministers are left able to sign security warrants to approve Secret Service use of sensitive powers. What contingency plans are in place to deal with emergencies in the short term, Mr Speaker? The Prime Minister has said he will stay on as caretaker. How many more months of chaos does this country have to endure? With dozens of ministerial posts unfilled, who on earth will join the Prime Minister's government now? And how will a half-empty cabinet run the country until October? Mr Speaker, they will try desperately to change the person at the top, but it's the same old Tory party in government.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I cannot preempt the Prime Minister's statement, and the House and the nation will hear more very shortly, but government and the civil service will continue to function in the meantime. The business of the House statement will be made shortly, and members can ask questions of the Leader of the House of Commons about the matter of the business of this place. But the House will continue to function and government business will continue to function. Other Secretaries of State can deal with issues for other departments constitutionally and legally in necessary circumstances.
John Whittingdale.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Without wishing to preempt the Prime Minister's statement, does my right friend agree that he can be proud of a large number of achievements of his government? But can I invite my right friend to preempt the opposition by making clear that Margaret Thatcher, David Cameron, Tony Blair, Theresa May all left office and were succeeded by new leaders and new prime ministers without there being a general election, and that the ship of state sails on?
He is, of course, completely correct.
Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, I think as I came into the chamber, we were at 59 resignations and counting. It's a remarkable amount of leadership that was shown by the junior ministerial ranks rather than many of the Cabinet. Now, I've been longing since I was elected for a Cabinet of Remainers, but not necessarily of the kind that we've seen clinging like limpets to a rock. Now, today's announcement from the Prime Minister of his intention to resign comes after 2 years and 348 days in office, which by supreme irony is the same number of days as Neville Chamberlain spent in office as Prime Minister. And it's a Prime Minister who achieved Brexit under false pretences, purely as a part of his game to achieve entry to Downing Street. And in that 2 years and 348 days, he's left behind a trail of political chaos, of economic destruction, and leaving any reputation that the UK might have retained as a reliable international partner which stands up for the international rules-based order trampled into the dust.
We regularly in Scotland have to put up with patronising lectures about how well our government is performing. Yet we have a government in Westminster where we have an education department with no education ministers, where we have 6 police forces in England which are under special measures, and a government that seems utterly paralysed and unable to deal with the major issues of the day. The idea that the Prime Minister can stay on and preside over this till the autumn is utterly risible. How long can this farce be allowed to continue? How is it right that 300 Tory MPs will get to choose the next Prime Minister over that time, while denying the right of 5.5 million Scots to choose their own future?
The government and the civil service will continue to function in the meantime as they always have done and as they have done historically.
Well done.
Sir Christopher Cho.
Mr. Speaker, may I thank the Prime Minister for his great service to our nation and also to the people of Ukraine. And I think that people will rue the day that he was forced to resign. But can I say to my right honourable friend that isn't there a lot to be said for having a smaller cabinet, fewer ministers and hardly any parliamentary private secretaries? And can we have a pilot to show how successful that's going to be?
Minister.
Well, he makes a perfectly interesting point, but is somewhat outside the range of my responsibilities.
Dame Angela Riedel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have here a list of all of the resignations from government. Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't read them out, but there's plenty of tasty quotes in there that will be of use later on. The Minister can't sensibly argue that we have a functioning government when this number of people are missing. There are no people, ministers, to do statutory committees and legislation even as we speak. So what is the way forward? He can't just blather at the dispatch box when the government's disintegrating around him.
The business of the House of Commons will continue, and there are ministers to continue in place. I cannot preempt the Prime Minister's statement, but I've spoken to the Cabinet Secretary today, and government and civil service will continue to function in their public duty.
Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful and have to my right honourable and learned friend and have great sympathy for the position in which he finds himself. He and I have had to take some pretty rough cases in court in the past, and he's drawn a few short straws recently in that regard. And he's done so with dignity, if I may say. But can I ask him just to take this away? Whatever one's views on the Prime Minister, and I accept the importance of the continuity of the government. In fact, there's no need for a general election at all, and plenty of precedent for that. But will he take away the serious question mark that many have as to how long a caretaker Prime Minister can remain in place when there is really concern as to whether the government can be fully and effectively manned? Might it not be in everybody's interest to speed up the transition as much as possibly can be done?
Leader, sorry.
I thank my right honourable and learned friend for his kind remarks. He's right, of course, that a general election is not constitutionally necessary. The Prime Minister was before the liaison committee yesterday and said as much. And we will await events. I cannot preempt the Prime Minister's statement.
Mr. Carmichael.
Mr. Speaker, can I say I'm delighted to hear the Minister speaking positively about the role of the civil service. It contrasts rather well with the way in which the government in recent years have done nothing but traduce and undermine their position. But I have to say to the Minister, the Prime Minister could not remain as a caretaker. That is just putting the bull in charge of the china shop. And this is not all about ministers and politicians. This is about our constituents and the public services on which they depend and for which now months this government has been unable to deliver for them properly. That's why they all need to go.
The substantive matter that the right honourable gentleman mentions is not a matter for me, but I will say that ministers on this bench and in this House will serve the Crown and serve this country as they always have done.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for his statement. I'm glad, without wishing to preempt the Prime Minister, I'm glad he has finally come to his senses and will be making this statement shortly. I am very, very sad that in the last 48 hours, so many honourable and right honourable colleagues have felt the need to resign from government. If those people will not serve this Prime Minister, could I ask my honourable friend to convey to the Prime Minister that it will not be tenable for him to continue as a caretaker if he cannot fill the ministerial appointments he needs to?
Minister.
I'm sure my friend's comment has been noted.
Sir Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a great relief that we will no longer have a Prime Minister who keeps on saying things that turn out subsequently to be untrue. Will the Minister reassure us that the change will take place in hours, not months? And does the Minister recognise that effective democracy depends on ministers telling the truth?
Yes.
I can only say that the Prime Minister will make a statement shortly.
Sir Matthew Offord.
By those who enthusiastically supported decisions such as voting for Owen Paterson shows how they were unfit to serve as ministers in the beginning. But the governance of this country cannot be allowed to fail. So I would like to ask, when are these vacancies going to be filled? They must be filled immediately, and we cannot allow decisions to be made by other Secretaries of State from other departments. The country deserves better than that.
The government will continue to function, and I have spoken to the head of the civil service to that effect.
Dr. Rupert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Independent reports that the PM and Tory ministers resigning are entitled to £420,000 of severance pay. At the same time, we've got a government gripped by paralysis and we have a cost of living crisis. Can he confirm now from that dispatch box that they will be forfeiting their right to this? Because we do not reward failure.
The matter that the Honourable Lady refers to is set in statute. So it is a matter for the law, and that law would have been passed by this House.
Rachel McLean.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It was an enormous honour to serve as a Minister in the Home Office until yesterday, tackling violence against women and girls. I know that's a cause that all members of this House care deeply about. While we are discussing these matters, victims of rape, sexual assault, stalking and spiking continue to deserve justice, and they will continue to be victims of crime. Will my right honourable friend give his continued support to the vital work of Operation Soteria and the rape review? Will he join me to put on record my thanks to Detective Chief Constable Maggie Blythe, Chief Constable Sarah Crew, Assistant Commissioner Louisa Rov and many other serving senior police officers who I know will capably continue to drive forward this work? And will he also thank the civil servants in the Home Office who I know will continue to do this essential work?
I understand it's good to get on record, but there's a lot of other people I've got to try and get in. Minister.
I will do as she says, and I also commend her for her championship of this very important area. The rate review and the work thereof should, of course, continue.
John Pryor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There have been times, occasionally, when Prime Ministers have been temporarily incapacitated. There has never been a period in British history where a government has been incapacitated across every department of state. We've just heard how the secret services are being undermined by the current situation, putting national security at risk. At what point is the government going to actually start functioning again?
The government is functioning. I have already mentioned to the House that the great offices of state are still in place. He refers to our security and intelligence services. The Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary are in place.
Mr. Speaker, what provisions have been put in place for the continuing operation of the Partnership Council with the EU and its specialised committees over the coming months?
Well, I think he knows that I attended a meeting of the Partnership Council in Brussels recently. The functions of government, including in the international sphere, will continue apace.
Sir Tony Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you will be aware that before the House there are before both houses, there are two major bills affecting Northern Ireland. One, the bill on the Northern Ireland Protocol, is the Prime Minister's own decision. The one on Northern Ireland Legacy is very much the now resigned Secretary of State's province. Can we have absolute clarity at this critical moment in the history of Northern Ireland and its relations with both the rest of the UK and Ireland, that we get some sense from this government about how we take these important matters forward?
Well, I'm particularly conscious, of course, of the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, to which I think he is referring. The Leader of the House of Commons will be doing the usual business questions and answer session soon in this House.
Roberts.
The latest Conservative Party psychodrama only emphasises what many of us already know. The UK is a failed state. This government has shown contempt to devolution.
You typify it.
The Prime Minister's successor will treat the electorate of Wales with the same disdain, and in this palace the circus will roll on. Does he surely not recognise that now is the time for a new constitutional settlement for these islands?
Well, she frequently traduces this country. I disagree with her and could not disagree with her more strongly. She has a separatist agenda, of course, and she wishes for the country to split. But in my view, this country is the greatest country on earth.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the anniversary of 7/7, security is of paramount importance to all of us in this House. With no security minister, a depleted cabinet, a Home Office that was struggling prior to this chaos, what assurances can the Minister give us that the intelligence agencies are receiving all the full ministerial and legal engagement and sign-off in a timely way to keep us all safe?
I cannot discuss the security arrangements of this country from the dispatch box, but the Secretary of State for the Home Department is in place and is responsible for the arrangements appertaining to the security service of this country.
Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would suggest that the Paymaster General look up the meaning of functioning because his government is not it. Will the Paymaster General confirm whether the now former Secretary of State for Education will be getting the standard severance package for Secretary of State of 3 months' salary for a job she did for just 36 hours?
Matters such as pay and remuneration are set in statute. They are set in statute, not a matter for me.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The members of Parliament who have eventually forced out the Prime Minister have blindly stood by him during the no-confidence vote, have not miraculously found their principles or their voices, but are doing so out of their own naked interest, self-interest. Does the Minister agree with me that a damaged and flailing Prime Minister should go immediately and not hang around like a bad smell until the Tory conference in autumn?
I cannot preempt the Prime Minister's statement, but the business of government will continue functioning as normal.
Mr. Speaker, it's good to see the Paymaster General, one of the last remaining living crew on the ghost ship HMG. So in an effort to assist the burden of the skeleton crew that remain, would perhaps you like to arrange for the signing of a Section 30 order to begin the process of moving some of the functions of government to a fully functioning set of ministers in Holyrood?
No matter who forms the government of this country, the union of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is of paramount importance, as the people in Scotland themselves decided in the referendum in 2014.
Matt Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the current situation is clearly unsustainable. As we've heard earlier from my right honourable friend, it's damaging crucial decision-making and also it's harming our reputation abroad. Could the Minister please take this back to the Prime Minister and urge an urgent resolution and inform the House as soon as possible?
The Prime Minister will be speaking shortly.
Olivia Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Clearly, the idea of the Prime Minister continuing as a caretaker will be worrying many, many people. But it's interesting to hear from the BBC that MPs are privately briefing that they're worried about issues, maybe half-jokingly, that the PM might take us to war to avoid leaving office. What are you going to do? What is going to be done to make sure that the opposition can hold a caretaking Prime Minister who has lost the faith of the country and his own government to account?
Politics. May I gently recommend to the Honourable Lady that she does not listen to gossip and rumour. The fact of the matter is that responsible government in this country will continue.
Very grateful, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with the resignation this morning of the Secretary of State for Education, following on from her entire Commons ministerial team, the Education Select Committee never even got to ask her about her plans. Mr. Speaker, it's become abundantly clear to almost the entire population that the only functioning cabinet that there's been in 10 Downing Street for months, if not for a few years, has been the drinks cabinet. So when will the remnants of this government's front bench accept that they've been in collective denial for just far too long?
Well, I think the honourable gentleman asked a rhetorical question, but I would say to him this, that this government will continue to function as the country would expect.
Naz Shah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Looking at many Tory MPs in the lobbies and everywhere, looking at them, I'm using this word sadness. You know something, had it not been for the fact that each and every one of them on those benches upheld and let this Prime Minister carry on, he should have resigned. He should have resigned when Partygate happened. He should have resigned when Durhamgate happened. He should have resigned when his ethics advisor resigned. He should have resigned a long, long time ago. But each and every one of them kept him here, and now they're trying to take the moral high ground that he's finally on his way out. So I will not feel sorry for him. How do we hold them to account, Mr. Speaker, when there isn't a governing government? How does the opposition hold them to account?
The people who put the Prime Minister in place are the 14 million people who voted in the general election for this Conservative Party.
Mr. Speaker, this is one of the greatest crises any of us can remember. And in the national interest, surely, even for a short period of time, till recess, we should work across benches to sort this crisis. And I don't want any laughter here, Mr. Speaker, but I have a great deal of experience in education. There's no education minister on a short-term period. I will be very happy to help. But unpaid, Mr. Speaker, unpaid. But this, our constituents would want us across benches to work together, forget this petty politics, and get this government working again.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman, Mr. Speaker, but his services are not required. The reason his services will not be required is because there are a plethora of talented and dedicated individuals on the benches behind me who will serve in this government.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. For many people in Scotland, the outgoing Prime Minister is Westminster personified, backward, unfit for purpose, delusional and disgraced. And now, just like the union he is the Minister for, he is isolated, broken, bereft of ideas, and his time has come. The party is over. So can he tell me, will there be a leaving do in number 10 tonight? Because we'll be raising a drink in Coatbridge, Christ and Bellsill.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't think there's any serious answer expected from that frivolous question.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given a majority of government MPs now say the Prime Minister lacks the integrity and honesty required for that post, can the Minister explain what is the basis for the Prime Minister staying in post for a further 3 months?
I would recommend that the honourable gentleman awaits a statement which is due from the Prime Minister shortly.
Margaret Ringman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will be aware that our constituents contact us about extremely important matters, and they contact us when they've explored every other avenue to get a resolution to their problems. And we write to ministers on their behalf. And I'm extremely concerned on behalf of my constituents about what this means, not only for the casework that we have already sent to ministers, some of it of extreme importance for people's actual health and survival, but also going forward. It's untenable that the Prime Minister stays on until the autumn. Would the Minister please explain to me how it is that we can have a situation where there is no functioning government, but the Prime Minister thinks he can stay on? Well,
there is a functioning government and there's a functioning civil service who will continue to do their duty in supporting the operation and functionality of the state, as they always have done.
It's not to worry about the fact that a government elected with a majority of 82 years ago can carry on functioning because we have the civil service. But levelling up is a government priority. The bill enacting levelling up is in front of the House of Commons at the moment. If the government is functioning, can he tell us whether that committee is going ahead in 26 minutes' time?
Well, there is a Business of the House statement in the usual way, and she will be able to ask that question of the Leader of the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister speaks about responsible government, but yet we've had nearly 3 years of totally irresponsible government. My constituents are suffering massively. Surely, Mr. Speaker, the moral thing to do is not to look to the Constitution, but actually go to the country, call a general election and let the people of this country decide, not just on the Prime Minister, but on the rotten lot of bankrupt government that we've had for the past 2.5 years from the last election. It's not about the Constitution, it's about what the people of this country need, and that is responsible government, and they are not going to be getting it from your side, even with a change of Prime Minister.
The business of government will continue functioning as the public would expect it to do. And I reject the characterisation that he makes, and I suspect that the vast majority of the general public in this country would also reject that characterisation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister should be making the statement in this House, frankly, not anywhere else, so that we could be able to question him about the functioning of government. And I think, Mr. Speaker, you'd prefer that as well. But let me just ask him this. There are two major crises facing the country at the moment. One is the cost of living crisis, which is facing many, many millions of families, and the other is the situation in Ukraine and across NATO. There's a real possibility that a government might have to deploy further troops in the next few months for proper reasons. A caretaker government can't do that. Simply can't. The rules forbid them from doing that. And yet, I fear that this Prime Minister, the disgraced, deselected Prime Minister, will be more dangerous in these next 3 months, if he's allowed to have another 3 months, than he's been in the last 3 years. So can he please make sure that we have a proper government soon, in other words, before the summer recess?
Well, we have a proper government, and the proper government continues. I have to say to the honourable gentleman that he talks about cost of living in Ukraine, but I have hardly heard him or his honourable colleagues speak of those subjects over the past 6 months. They have mostly been talking about personalities. So it is this government which has been getting on with the business of representing the United Kingdom in international fora and have led the way on Ukraine, and when it comes to dealing with the global cost of living crisis, have been doing that too.
Wakeford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, wow, what was that response to this urgent question? Mr. Speaker, is the Minister tired of propping up this Prime Minister and defending the indefensible? Minister, where was your letter? Did it get lost with your backbone?
I'm not answering any questions along those lines, Mr. Speaker.
We'll resign then.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today it appears a number of bill committees will be cancelled on issues of utmost importance, from national security to levelling up, as my honourable friend just raised, and tackling fraud, because there are no ministers to attend them. The Minister says the business of House will continue, but it will not. It obviously is not doing. Committees are being cancelled. In no other workplace would such crucial work go undone. Can the Minister explain why his Prime Minister and why his party think this is acceptable?
I'd say to the honourable lady, as I have said before, that when it comes to the legislative business of this House, that is a matter for the Leader of the House of Commons, who holds cabinet position and who is in place, and who is, within a short period of time, due to give his regularly scheduled weekly question and answer session, and she'll be able to take advantage of that in this House.
Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has brought his office into disrepute. Our country shouldn't have to put up with him any longer. Will the Prime Minister be leaving Number 10 this weekend?
Yeah. He will need to wait for the Prime Minister's statement later today.
Janet Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Time reports this morning of Downing Street being like a bunker with gallows humour. This is no surprise, really, given the track record of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is now set on staying in post until summer. Now, if this happens, is the Minister concerned about what further damage the Prime Minister will do?
The honourable member will need to wait for the Prime Minister's statement later today. I cannot preempt what the Prime Minister's statement will be.
Emma Lowbat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Away from this place, our constituents are waiting for answers from this government. My constituents, Lisa and Mark Rutherford and Caroline Curry, had their precious children taken from them in the Manchester Arena terror attack. Due to archaic legislation, they can't register their deaths. The Justice Department advised an answer on a possible change to this legislation was imminent. Since the government has collapsed, who will give them an answer and when?
I'm very sorry to hear of the appalling bereavement suffered by her constituents, and it's an unimaginable loss. And I would like the honourable member to convey my sympathies and the sympathies of the entire government for that. With regard to her question, the functioning of government continues. The civil service supports ministers in place. Ministers are in place to support the functioning of necessary government. That will continue.
Dugan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I point out to the Minister that we do in fact have functioning government within the United Kingdom. We have a functioning government in Edinburgh and we have a functioning government in the Senedd, in Cardiff. And where government does not function across these islands, in Westminster and in Northern Ireland, they have one thing in common, and it's the dead malign hand of this Tory government. So what possible confidence can the people of these islands, the people who want to stay in this broken union and the millions of us who don't, what confidence can we have in who is coming next? Because they all stood by and watched what this Prime Minister did for 6 months or more.
It is the Westminster government that represents this country, and the union of the United Kingdom will continue apace, despite his opposition to it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister praises the civil service while planning to cut 91,000 of them. I echo his praise, but they cannot be expected to cover for the lack of ministers, or for that matter, for the British people's lack of confidence in this dysfunctional government. So, will the Minister say, will the missing ministers be replaced? And does he accept that they are all tainted by the Prime Minister's disgrace, and what is needed is a fresh start?
Ministerial appointments are not a matter for me, but the functioning of government will continue apace.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 18 minutes' time, I am due to sit on the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill Committee, as set out on the order paper. The Leader of the House won't be before the Parliament at that point. There are no ministers, there is no Secretary of State, and there is a Prime Minister in office but not in government. So can the Paymaster General let me know if that committee is going ahead in now 17 minutes and when it is due to recommence, if not?
I'm unable to answer the honourable member's question. The committees of this House will continue in the normal way of business.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The majority of people who've left the government have referred to the Prime Minister's lack of integrity, honour, honesty and competence. They surely can't return to work for such a man, even on a temporary basis. So to get a functioning government, we need a full set of ministers. We need a swift transition. Will he at least convey that message to Number 10 and to his Cabinet colleagues?
It is up to each individual to decide how best to serve in government or not. And the functioning of government can and will continue. There are a multitude of ministers and a plethora of items on agendas which will continue to be dealt with the support, as I've said, of the civil service, having spoken this morning, as I've told the House, to the Cabinet Secretary.
Jim Shannon.
I wasn't here.
No. Right. There we are. Minute. We're really settled down. Right, just let everybody leave who needs to leave. We come to the next urgent question. Yvette Cooper, Shadow Home Secretary.
To ask the Minister to make a statement about the meeting between the Prime Minister and the former KGB agent Alexander Lebedev at the height of the Skripal crisis.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Alexander Lebedev is a well-known former KGB officer and also a former owner of the London Evening Standard newspaper. Yesterday, the Prime Minister told the Liaison Committee in response to questions from the Right Honourable Member for Kingston upon Hull opposite Hull North that he had met Mr Lebedev on a very few occasions. I understand that the Prime Minister also confirmed where he had met that he had met Mr Lebedev without officials present, and that he had subsequently reported those meetings to officials as required. I do not have any information about the content of any discussions that may or may not have been held with Mr Lebedev. All government ministers are made fully aware of their responsibilities to safeguard national security sensitive information. It's been the long-standing policy of all governments of all colours not to comment on intelligence or national security sensitive matters, as to do so could jeopardise the very security which it is the first duty of government to protect. In response to the Salisbury attack, the UK expelled 23 Russian intelligence officers and significantly strengthened our defences against Russian interference in the United Kingdom.
Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We've sought this UQ despite the meltdown in the government because it goes to the heart of our national security. Yesterday, the Prime Minister admitted to the Home Affairs and Public Accounts Committee chairs that in April 2018, as Foreign Secretary, he met with the former KGB officer Alexander Lebedev, father of Lord Lebedev, in Italy without any officials, without any security. He went there straight from a NATO meeting where the top item on the agenda was Russia, at the height of the Salisbury poisoning crisis, after Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia had been attacked, and before Charlie Rowley and Dawn Sturgis had been exposed to the remaining Novichok. This was a chemical weapon attack by Russian agents on British soil that targeted 2 British residents, had life-changing effects for a British police officer, and killed a British citizen. On the 20th of May this year, Alexander Lebedev was sanctioned by the Canadian government, a Five Eyes partner of the UK, for being one of the 14 identified people who have directly enabled Vladimir Putin's senseless war in Ukraine and bear responsibility for the pain and suffering of the people of Ukraine. The UK has not yet sanctioned him. The charges against the Prime Minister are not just about lack of integrity, they are about complete disregard for basic national security and the patriotic interests of this country. And those charges lie not just with the Prime Minister, but with all of those who have enabled him and covered up for him on this issue. So, did the Foreign Office, the Home Office and the Security Service know about this meeting in advance? Was a detailed record made after the event of the meeting? Because there are rumours that the Foreign Secretary was too drunk to properly remember. Is that true? Yeah. There are also rumours that Alexander Lebedev was trying to arrange a phone call from the meeting with the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov. Is that true? Did that phone call happen? The record of ministers' interest says the Foreign Secretary accepted hospitality in Italy for himself and a guest, but he travelled home alone. Who was that guest, and did that put him in a compromising position? The Prime Minister referred yesterday to several meetings with Alexander Lebedev without officials. When were the others? Were any of them while he was Prime Minister? And the Shadow Security Minister has been asking for confirmation that this meeting happened for months. So why have Home Office ministers, Cabinet Office ministers and Foreign Office ministers all been covering up? It is bad enough covering up for parties and breaking the law, but covering up over national security is a total disgrace. It puts all our safety and security at risk. It's not just the Prime Minister, it is the whole government that is letting the country down.
Staff. I'm not expecting you to take everybody. It's going to be short with a lot of other business.
Mr. Speaker, I take issues of our national security extremely seriously, which is why I am at this bench today. Day after day, ministers in this government, especially those in the Foreign Office Ministers, make decisions affecting the safety and security of UK citizens, in the case of the Foreign Office Ministers, especially UK citizens overseas. On the subject of sanctions, the UK has, of course, introduced world-leading sanctions packages since Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. That is over 12,000 individuals. I cannot comment on any further sanctions, as we never comment on sanctions in advance. But I can confirm, Mr. Speaker, that since February the 24th and today, I, like other Foreign Office Ministers, have carried out my duties in signing off a number of those sanctions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The last 48 hours of this hapless government have been quite disgusting to any decent person who's been submitting to the spectacle of it. And the last few years haven't been much cop either. Somebody who is deeply inappropriate for public office, not least the highest office, aided and abetted and enabled by venality and cowardice by people who are now falling over themselves to compete for sanctimony and hypocrisy. His toxic legacy will live after him. Now, we don't celebrate on these benches the departure of the Prime Minister. Like getting rid of a headache, we're just glad it's going. But his toxic legacy will live after him, and we'll all need to deal with the consequences of this disastrous administration. His toxic legacy on inflicting his disastrous Brexit on us all, asleep at the wheel over climate change and allowing a cost of living crisis to accumulate, which all of our citizens are dealing with, inaction on climate change, breaking international law over Northern Ireland. We will all of us be dealing with this thereafter. And this revelation, and I'm glad to hear the Minister takes national security seriously, and I don't doubt it.
Order. First of all, it's meant to be relevant to actually what we're debating. I've had nothing yet, and you've just lost you've used your full minute. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to actually put a question.
Forgive me, Mr. Speaker. I'm taking this stuff really seriously, and I am disgusted.
The rest of us are.
I'm trying to chime with the mood of the House rather than the government. The Minister takes national security seriously, but it's quite obvious from the Prime Minister's admission yesterday that he has serious questions to answer about it. So I appreciate the Minister's perhaps not in a position to make a proper answer, but will she at least allow the prospect of a police investigation into the Prime Minister and his influence over the influence that Russian individuals have over him, because his toxic legacy over national security cannot be something he can evade responsibility for? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I would say that, and I'll follow up as well to the answer from the Honourable Lady opposite. The Prime Minister did commit yesterday that he would follow up with the Honourable Member's question at the Liaison Committee. He did commit to that. I have asked about whether or not there is more detailed information about the discussions, but I do not have any information about the content of those discussions at this time. Thank you.
Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the Minister inadvertently misled us earlier, because the Prime Minister yesterday, I was at the Liaison Committee, did not say what she said. He did not say, to the best of my memory anyway, that he had notified other officials. If he had notified other officials, surely, as the Minister would understand, that meeting would have appeared on the list on the transparency records of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office for April 2018, and it is not there. So either she has misled us inadvertently today, or the Prime Minister did so perhaps more deliberately previously.
Mr. Speaker, I was obviously not at the Liaison Committee yesterday. I was, as you may know, giving the ministerial statement in order to fast-track the ratification of Finland and Sweden to joining NATO, another measure that is absolutely crucial to the safety and security here, and then later on in the Chamber ensuring that we pass the funding. In terms of the question, therefore, I can repeat again what I said in my opening words. It is my understanding that the Prime Minister confirmed that where he had met that he had met Mr. Lebedev without officials present, and that he subsequently reported those meetings to officials. That is my understanding, and that is what I have been told. If that is not accurate reflection, then I do apologise, but this is not me misleading. That was what I was told. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to intelligence reports that I have seen, according to intelligence reports I have seen, a serving FSB officer reported in 2017, and I quote, Alexander Lebedev is considered by the FSB to be an important asset. More recently, he has significantly expanded his businesses in occupied Crimea, pleaded with the Kremlin for economic help for occupied Crimea, and was revealed as the indirect owner of a company called Energomash, which supplies the Russian nuclear program. How is it possible for the Prime Minister to stay in office if he is conspiring with an agent of the Russian state?
Thank you very much. As the member opposite knows, I cannot comment about any potential future sanctions that may be introduced, because we never do that in advance. So I cannot give any more comment on the particular individual that is discussing. In terms of following up, because I know that the honourable previous member asked me to be more clear about what the Prime Minister said at the liaison committee, I have just been passed a note that apparently the Prime Minister says that he thinks he mentioned this meeting to officials. That is, I'm reporting what I have been told. Thank you.
I have to say to the Minister, it's deeply unsatisfactory that she comes to the House so ill-prepared, because this matter has been doggedly pursued by the Honourable Member for Halifax for many, many months. Can I just say to the Minister, does she agree with me that in light of the admissions that were made at the Liaison Committee yesterday, it would be wholly inappropriate for the Prime Minister, if he is about to resign, to try and stay as a caretaker Prime Minister in light of these very serious allegations that reflect on his ability to keep this country safe?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is expected to make a statement shortly to the people of this country, and I obviously cannot comment on that in advance. I do hear what she says.
Just for my clarification, the Minister previously said we will be getting something in this House. Are we now saying it's to the people, not to this House?
I understand that he's intending to make a press statement that to the people of this country.
So not this House, I take it. That is totally not satisfactory. Alistair Cameron.
Satisfactory, Mr. Speaker, if I may. I admire your magnificent understatement there. Surely this admission, though, illustrates why this man cannot remain as Prime Minister, even as a caretaker. He is simply not to be trusted. I've seen 4 other Prime Ministers stand at that dispatch box in my time in this House, and I cannot imagine any one of them becoming involved in an enterprise such as this. The relationship with Russia goes right through this government. We were told 4 months ago that we would get the report into the golden visa schemes. We still haven't got it today. When will we see that report published? Why has it been delayed?
The visa scheme has ceased.
Derek Choi.
Speaker, Mr. Speaker, it is truly horrifying what we've heard, and deeply disturbing and worrying that the Prime Minister, then as the Foreign Secretary, met with an agent of Russia. Can I ask the Minister, because I've not actually heard this, would she actually condemn that meeting?
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I just need to repeat again that all government ministers are made fully aware of their responsibilities to safeguard national security sensitive information, as I am and as others are. And I cannot comment any further because I do not have any further details of this meeting. Thank you.
Dame Angela Reid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister really can't come to this House so unprepared that she can't give us any answers when the Prime Minister has now belatedly admitted that he met an agent of the Russian state whilst Foreign Secretary without any security or anyone else to listen to what he had to say to Putin's henchmen. She has now got to come to this House properly prepared and tell us why this disgraced Prime Minister has any right to stay in office a second longer, given that he is now a threat, a direct threat to our national security.
As I said earlier, I take this national security and the security of our citizens extremely seriously, which is why it is absolutely vital that the government continues to have Foreign Office ministers in place. I have inquired as to whether or not there are further details of the meetings, and these alleged meetings, and I do not have any further details at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, given that the then Foreign Secretary went from the NATO meeting to these meetings, did he have any government papers with him in his possession at the time? And secondly, we know that the Prime Minister has been very careless in the past with his mobile phone number being available in public, I think for 15 years. Did he have his personal electronic devices with him at the time? And if he did, were they searched and examined by the security services after that meeting?
Mr. Speaker, as I have said again, I do not have any further details at this time. I have asked to see if there are further details, but I do not have the details at this time. The Prime Minister, however, has announced that he is stepping down and will be making a statement shortly, as we know.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Why did it take until yesterday for the Prime Minister to admit that he'd met a KGB agent in secret? Will there be a published report on this matter?
Mr. Speaker, he was questioned yesterday and he answered the question yesterday. Today is today. Thank you.
Alex Song. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we know, the Prime Minister often goes into meetings, has conversations, and then has a lapse of memory. He had a lapse of memory after the meeting with Alexander Lebedev. Has he now recalled and informed the Minister of the conversation, that meeting? Because it's not just a national security matter, but Alexander Lebedev owns businesses in illegally occupied Crimea, which is Ukrainian, not Russian territory. So it's a matter not just for us, but also for the country of Ukraine.
Mr. Speaker, at the time, let us remember that at the time we had this devastating attack against a civilian on UK soil involving chemical weapons. That led to a massive effort by the Foreign Office to coordinate the expulsion of Russian diplomats from embassies all across the world. At this current time, the UK is also working with our allies across the world to counter Russian disinformation and to help remind the people across the world about the brutal and illegal invasion of Russia against Ukraine. In terms of the information that he requests, I do not have any further information at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, I hope that in answer to my question and those of my colleagues, where the Minister has said she doesn't have the information at this time, I do hope we will get answers in writing in due course. But my question is, what reassurance can the Minister give us that the Prime Minister has had no meetings with any other KGB agents or other people who pose a threat to our national security?
In terms of writing, I understand that at the Liaison Committee yesterday, the Prime Minister committed to follow up in writing with the chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee. So there is a commitment to put information in writing, and that is important. I cannot comment on any other further meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think the Foreign Minister understands quite how serious this issue is, not only about our own national security, but at this time where Ukraine is defending its own right to its own land, it is completely undermining President Zelensky. So what analysis has her office undertaken to understand the impact of the Prime Minister's secret meetings?
So can I just say that that Russia is a top national security priority for this government. We have made huge strides to counter the threat by the Russian state. The National Security Council agreed the Russia strategy back in 2017. The government has published a full and comprehensive response to the ISC report back in January 2020, implementing a majority of the committee's recommendations. We have closed the Tier 1 visa route, a visa route which indeed was introduced, I believe, by the party opposite. We continue to call out Russian malign activities where they occur across the globe. Thank you.
Alison Thoones.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Open Democracy has reported that the Conservative Party has received £62,000 in donations from Russian-linked donors since the current escalation of the conflict in Ukraine began, including a further £50,000 from Lyubov Chernukin, who is married to Putin's former Deputy Finance Minister. Mr. Speaker, we know that money buys influence. What analysis has she done of the influence that buys and where it goes in national security implications?
Mr. Speaker, transparency of information about political donations is really important. Only individuals on the UK electoral roll or UK registered companies are allowed to make political donations. It is an offence for political parties and other campaigners to receive donations from impermissible sources, and that includes donations from foreign nationals living abroad. That is the law, and that is the law that all parties, including the Conservative Party, need to uphold.
Ian Mance.
Well, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, given the revelations of the last 24 hours and the suspicions which have existed for quite a number of months, if not years, why would any of our allies now share any sensitive information with us while the current Prime Minister remains in office?
Because the UK has been leading the international efforts to stand up for Ukraine against Russian aggression. That is why allies across the world have been working with the UK, because we have been helping to lead the efforts to stand up for the people of Ukraine in the attack against their sovereignty, their democracy and their freedom.
Oh, Jim Sham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That the meeting with Alexander Lebedev took place is not the issue in question. There has been much controversy surrounding the meeting. Many feel that there's a lack of detail of what took place. Can I very respectfully say to the Minister who I have fondness for, will a full disclosure of all that has been discussed be made available with Alexander Lebedev? Will the threat to national security, given Lebedev's close links with the KGB and the Kremlin, be disclosed at the same time as well? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I cannot disclose any further information at this time. I understand members want further information. He will also recognise that we would not disclose any information that might further put our own security of our citizens at risk, and that is extremely important about why we do not disclose information from time to time if it was to put people at risk. However, in answer to the questions that were asked by the Honourable Member, the Chair of the Select Committee yesterday, the Prime Minister did commit to write to her. She has that commitment from him. He has, of course, said since then that he will be stepping down and is expected to give further information on that. Thank you.
Right, just before we start business questions, I'd like to refer to the exchange between the Leader and myself last week about the Youth Parliament, that we will have to lay for the Youth Parliament, but I would like to point out that the letter from me had not arrived to the Leader's office in time before business questions. I want to clarify that he was absolutely correct on that, but I do accept that the Leader will now take it forward with great heart and I'm sure with great speed. Right, let us start with business questions. Can I come to the Shadow Leader of the House, Thangham Debada?
Mr. Speaker, to ask the Leader of the House if he will give us the forthcoming business.
Good luck, Leader.
Speaker, it will be a pleasure.
The business for the House commencing the 11th of July will include Monday the 11th of July, consideration of a business of the House motion, followed by all stages of the Energy, Oil and Gas Profits Levy Bill, followed by a debate on motions relating to the liability of trade unions and proceedings in tort, increase of limits on damages, Order 2022, and the draft Conduct of Employment Agencies and Employment Businesses Amendment Regulations 2022. Tuesday, the 12th of July, remaining stages of the Online Safety Bill, Day 1, followed by debate on a motion on restoration and renewal of the Palace of Westminster. On Wednesday, the 13th of July, will be consideration in committee of the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, Day 1. Thursday, the 14th of July, a debate on a motion on Srebrenica, followed by a general debate on protecting and restoring nature at COP15 and beyond. The subjects for these debates were determined by the Backbench Business Committee. On Friday, the 15th of July, private members' bills. The provisional business for the week commencing the 18th of July includes Monday, the 18th of July, consideration in committee of the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, Day 2. Tuesday, the 19th of July, consideration, a conclusion of consideration in committee of the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, Day 3. Wednesday, the 20th of July, conclusion of remaining stages of the Online Safety Bill. And on Thursday, the 20th of July, business to be determined by the Backbench Business Committee. The House will rise for the summer recess at the conclusion of business on Thursday, the 21st of July, and return on Monday, the 5th of September.
Thank you, Deputy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Leader of the House for the forthcoming business, although his government is clearly not in any position to deliver it. The Prime Minister is resigning. We're hearing on Twitter there may be cabinet appointments happening, but we've had bills cancelled this morning. There is no doubt, as we have been saying for months, that this government is simply unable to govern. Inflation reaches the highest for 40 years. 59 members of the government, when I last printed out a copy of the speech, I think we're up to now, have resigned. An economic growth grinding to a halt. The Hours in Post Chancellor spending his first day on the job asking his boss to quit, not planning for how we're going to deal with the cost of living crisis. Now, as backlog Britain bulges, his Attorney General has been on television announcing her leadership bid. This is far beyond merely a distraction. This is a Tory government paralysed by sleaze and scandal, and with a shameful act of desperation, a Prime Minister dragging the country down with him as he goes, but I'm afraid to say his party has propped him up to do it. Yeah. Even if the Prime Minister is now Prime Minister in name only, and frankly that situation does need to change, there appears to be no one left to drive the work of government forward in Whitehall. Now, the Leader of the House has constantly been telling me that his government is getting on with the job. They're clearly not. We were told that appointments would be made last night. We're still waiting for ministerial posts in the Treasury. Schools, there's no one there. Justice, environment, employment, housing, levelling up, the flagship levelling up policy. Levelled to where I understand there's only one minister left standing. When will these ministers be replaced? What qualification do you now need to be a minister under this government? Who knows? Who knows? Not just unable to carry out their basic functions in Whitehall, the business of this House can't proceed. And the Right Honourable Gentleman may know that the Paymaster General referred questions about cancelled bill committees to him. So I will ask him, what is happening to today's Levelling Up Bill Committee that should have been going now for, I think, 12 minutes? I asked the Leader of the House, when will that be rescheduled? The Northern Ireland Cabinet Secretary resigned just a few hours ago. Where does that leave the Northern Ireland Troubles Bill? What is the plan for all of this? He's announced the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill for the 13th, 18th and 19th of July. Now, considering the seriousness of this legislation and the impact it has on our country's reputation, and the fact that this Prime Minister he is now a caretaker only, what mandate does this government have to proceed? If it's not primary legislation, it's secondary. During the passage of the Building Safety Bill, the Minister admitted there were unresolved issues that needed statutory instruments passing to protect leaseholders. Is there anyone who can sign these SIs? Mr. Speaker, in excruciating liaison committee appearance yesterday, the Prime Minister admitted that he'd met the former KGB agent with links to Putin without officials present in Italy when he was the Foreign Secretary. Now, I'm glad that my right honourable friend was able to ask questions, with your permission this morning, Mr Speaker, but not a single one was answered. Yep. Now, this is on security, Mr Speaker. If my right honourable friend is not able to get answers to questions when there was a context of a chemical weapons attack on British soil in which British people died, how is this a government that is functioning? And I ask the Leader of the House, with the greatest respect, can he tell us how does any of this look like a functioning government? Yeah. Now, week after week, the Leader has failed to answer my very specific questions on the appointment of a new ethics advisor. Now, given the new revelations, just the new ones regarding Lebedev, surely the Leader of the House could agree with me today and hopefully answer my question today that a new ethics advisor is needed. Could he tell us when will this vacancy be filled, and can he guarantee that investigations ongoing prior to Lord Geit's resignation will be completed? Because, Mr Speaker, the first duty of any government, as we all know, is to keep its people safe. When the Security Minister resigns on the morning, we cannot allow this to drift into evening, let alone the weekend, and for this Conservative Party to continue to put national security at risk. Every single Tory MP, every single one, should take a long, hard look in the mirror, ask themselves how we got here, with a government that's collapsed before our eyes, putting the British people through an excruciating and dangerous act of desperation, with a caretaker Prime Minister, as my honourable friend has said, is even more dangerous as a caretaker than an actual Prime Minister. I may disagree with the Leader of the House politically, but I have huge respect for his office and for that of the Prime Minister. But, Mr Speaker, they propped him up, they were complicit, they have overseen 12 years of stagnation, declining public services and empty promises. We need a fresh start with the Labour government.
Leader. Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I think that there's a very clear difference between the two sides of this dispatch box. Now is the moment for calmness and for professionalism, not for ranting and not for overexcitement. Can I start, Mr Speaker, by saying the Honourable Lady mentioned national security. I think before we proceed, we should just recognise that it is the 15th anniversary of the 7/7 bombings. The Home Secretary is the Minister responsible for national security. She is in office. She is still the Home Secretary. She is in control of our national security, and there is no issue over our national security at any level at this moment in time. She mentioned the business. I presented the business of the House here this morning. That business will be delivered. That programme for the next 2 weeks. There are ministers in place to deliver that. And I would just gently say to her, she said, how are we going to proceed with the Northern Ireland Troubles Bill? Well, actually, we've concluded the Northern Ireland Troubles Bill in this House, if she paid attention. That bill is now concluded. I would say she's very concerned about legislation. There were only 4 members of the opposition in this House to debate that motion. That's how seriously they take the troubles in Northern Ireland. There were 0 Liberal Democrats. Only 4 of them could be bothered to turn up to debate that. She mentioned Salisbury and the issue over the chemical weapons. She supported a leader of the opposition who wanted to send the evidence back to Russia for them to consider. Just pause for a moment and think about who she supported at that moment in time. And I think it's all right heckling and saying we've got nothing to say. We're getting on with the business of government in a calm way. There are some bill committees that will not run today, but they'll be back up and running very soon. And she finally finished with Lord Geit. I declare my interest, Mr Speaker, at the beginning of that, in that I'm assured that there are processes in place and those matters will continue to be reviewed and the results of those will come forward very soon.
Just right, darling.
Mr Speaker, as the Leader of the House continues to have confidence in the Prime Minister, my question requires a simple answer. Does the Leader of the House agree with the Prime Minister that if a complaint is raised against a Member of Parliament that is so grave that it triggers an investigation, that that Member of Parliament or Minister should not be promoted or continue on the front bench? So my question to the Leader of the House is simple. Does he agree with the Prime Minister?
Leader. Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure how that question is relevant to the business of the House in any way, shape or form, but if the Honourable Lady wanted to apply for an adjournment debate on any matter, she'd be welcome to.
Can I just say, those who were late, please don't embarrass me by standing. Can we now come to the SNP spokesperson? We're all waiting for Pete Wishart.
And we most certainly can, Mr. Speaker, and thank you ever so much. And he's away, and hasn't the Leader of the House been curiously quiet over the course of the past 24 hours? One of the few Johnson loyalists that was left standing last night, I thought we might have found him chained to the radiator with his beloved Prime Minister in the bunker this morning. But can I reassure him, he's a rank outsider to follow his Prime Minister. I think he's something like 80 to 1 just now to take over for the Prime Minister, but I think that's even a long shot even for him. But what a mess they have made of this. This is a Prime Minister who can't even leave the scene without almost burning the house down. He's the first Prime Minister in history who, when receiving that tap on the shoulder from the men in grey suits, told them to go and get stuffed. Surely there is no way on earth that he can remain in a position as any sort of caretaker, particularly with all the big issues that we have to consider and address as we go through the summer period. He's more an undertaker than a caretaker. And what a joke, can I say to the Leader of the House, of a business statement this is, with a government at half capacity. There's barely enough ministers to respond to debates and to answer the questions, and business has been cancelled for the rest of the day. What happens to all these vacant positions? Will they all now return to the post? Does the Levelling Up Secretary now get his job back? And, Mr. Speaker, we need to debate this Prime Minister's legacy, because he will go down in history as one of the worst Prime Ministers in history at one of the worst possible times. In just 3 years, he's managed to decimate our international reputation, our economy and our democracy. He will be their 4th Prime Minister in 6 years. Maybe the problem isn't quite with whoever leads the shower over there. And people ask us, why do we want independence for Scotland? Well, I'm not asking that this morning. Independence would mean we would never get another Prime Minister who we never voted like him ever again. And isn't it funny, the man that's trashed so much of the democracy in the UK, one of his last acts was to write to our First Minister to try and deny democracy to our nation. He's now gone, Scotland will soon be gone too.
Well, Mr. Speaker, once again, there was not much in there that was relevant to the business of the House, but we await the Prime Minister's statement this afternoon. I can assure the honourable gentleman that vacant positions will be refilled as the reshuffle progresses today and tomorrow, and the government will continue to function in a professional way and deliver for the people of the United Kingdom.
Andrew Sellew.
Much, Mr. Speaker. Can we have an urgent debate in government time, because I've already had a debate in Westminster Hall, on increasing general practice capacity where we have huge increases in population? The Leader, I think, has similar issues that I have in my constituency. They exist all over the country, and I think it would show to our constituents that, notwithstanding what has gone on over the last few days, the government gets this, they take the issue seriously, and that serious work will go on this issue over the next few weeks and months.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I pay tribute to my honourable friend who's done a lot of work on this matter, and pay tribute to his leadership on this. He'll be aware that we are investing £1.5 billion to create an extra 50 million GP appointments by 2024. We want people to feel confident that when they have a problem, they can see a GP face to face, but I think it is something which is worthy of further debate, and I know my honourable friend will continue to press. I would encourage him to seek a debate in this House.
Ian Mearns, Chair of the Backbench Committee.
Very grateful, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Leader of the House for announcing the business and the Backbench Business Committee debates for the 14th of July. And can I also give the House notice that on the 21st of July, which has been allocated to the committee, that it will be our proposal in the first half of the day to have a debate on United Kingdom sanctions for human rights abuses and corruption. And Mr. Speaker, for quite a few years, the final Thursday before the summer recess has been a time which, when allowed, has been allocated to a debate on matters to be raised before the forthcoming summer adjournment. And the committee has agreed that it would be a fitting tribute to name this debate after Sir David Amess, who was truly taken from us last October. So our proposal is that this tribute would see the debate renamed the Sir David Amess Summer Adjournment Debate. Sir David was renowned amongst our colleagues for his regular appearances at our committee and his impressive contributions to pre-recess adjournment debates. So, Mr Speaker, the Backbench Business Committee would like to honour his memory by naming the debate after him. I've raised this matter briefly in the House after Sir David's loss and had the support of the then Leader of the House. And, Mr Speaker, I've written to the Chair of the Procedure Committee, to yourself and to the Leader to this effect.
Mr Speaker, can I pay tribute to the honourable gentleman and to his committee for the work that they do. Thank him for announcing the debate that he mentioned, and also from the dispatch box offer my full support to his recommendation to call the debate the David Amess debate. I'd be delighted. I hope I have the opportunity to respond to him in that and other members in that debate, and I think it's a very fitting tribute that he's introduced.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I know this may seem very mundane given the drama that's happening around us, but it's very important to my constituents. We've got several fantastic sustainable businesses, and I recently met with CHANG, who make leggings and sporting tops out of plastic bottles that have been recycled, and Third Rock, who make sustainable activewear for climbing out of old carpets and discarded fishing nets, which is really important. But in my discussions with them, we've talked about the challenges and opportunities they face, in particular in relation to financing their small businesses. Please could we have a debate in this House about financing for small business who focus on sustainability and ethical sourcing of products?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for her question, and I would say it's not a trivial matter. I think the businesses up and down this country are the backbone of our economy. The government provides extensive business support for small and medium-sized enterprises, including sustainable businesses. The British Business Bank programmes are supporting over 1.77 million smaller businesses with £89 billion worth of finance. And I know she'll have the opportunity at Bay's questions next week if she wanted to highlight the fantastic recyclable business that she has in her constituency.
John Pryor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I associate myself with the comments made a few minutes ago about David Amess, my former neighbour, David Amess. One of the many consequences of rising energy prices is that hundreds of swimming pools in this country face closure in the next few months. This has been raised this morning under DCMS questions, but it's not technically really a question for the Culture, Media and Sport Department. It's more Treasury and Energy. Now, if we have got any ministers left, by the way, in those departments, could we have a statement on how this crisis, potential crisis, will be tackled with all the implications for future generations?
Leader. Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. It is a very important one. I have swimming pools in my own constituency that are struggling with the rising cost of global energy. It's something that the government understands and takes very seriously. That's why we've poured billions of pounds in of support. I hope the local authorities can find it in within their means to help and support those swimming pools that are under pressure, but there may be the opportunity at Bay's questions under the energy portfolio to raise that next week at Bay's questions.
Matthew
Mr Speaker, the 7th of July remains a very painful day for many Londoners. It's 17 years since 52 of them were murdered in London. 5 of those victims were actually people who had direct connections with Hendon, and include one of them, Anthony Fatayé Williams, walked past me just 2 hours before his death. But, Mr Speaker, my constituent, 9-year-old Precious, has a neurodegenerative disease resulting in complex health conditions, including scoliosis. Her medical team have advised that she needs an operation to insert maggot rods into her spine to correct this. The use of these rods was suspended in 2020 due to safety concerns. However, their use has now been cleared for procedures in places including the United States and other countries, as a modified version has been implemented. Precious's family and the spinal team at Great Ormond Street have been waiting for over 6 months for the MHRA's approval. Can we have a minister come to the dispatch box and update us on the progress of approving this desperately needed technology for my constituent?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable gentleman and join him in paying tribute to the victims of the 7/7. I think I may have inadvertently said the 15th anniversary. It is right, it is the 17th anniversary. Just turning to Precious, I'm sure that the whole House sends our best wishes to Precious, and I can assure the honourable gentleman that the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency are taking this matter very seriously. I understand he has written to the MHRA's Chief Executive, and they will be providing a full written response in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to take myself with the Leader of the House remarks on the 17th anniversary of the 7/7 bombings and remembering the 52 victims who died, and just a reminder that London will never be cowed by terrorism. At a time when we need stability across the government, we have seen that the Minister for Policing has been appointed to another role. The fact that the Met Police, along with 6 other police forces, are in special measures does not give my constituents in Vauxhall the confidence that this government is stable. Can the Leader of the House please outline when we will get a reappointment in that important post?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question and for her comments about 7/7 and recognise the cross-party support on matters of national security. I can assure her that a reshuffle is taking place, is my understanding, that that's a very important role and will be filled very soon, and I'm sure then she'll be able to question the new Minister in due course.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Of course, as we commemorate the terrorist attacks on London, people should remember that the day before was a day of great joy, when London had been awarded the Olympics, and it was then tinged with sadness because of the terrorist atrocities that took place the following day. Over the course of the pandemic, the Department for Transport have continued to bail out Transport for London to cover the cost of the loss of income on fares. However, the Department have refused, quite rightly, to cover the cost of the Mayor of London not doing what he should have done in dealing with TfL's finances. Now, the current deal, Mr Deputy Speaker, runs out, I believe, next weekend. We desperately need an announcement from the Department of Transport for what's going to happen after next weekend in terms of financing for London Transport, because we cannot have a position continuing where the Mayor of London refuses to take the action that is required to reduce costs.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question and recognise that the challenge that Londoners will face if that transport system does not operate. He's right to draw attention to the amount of support that the government has offered, and he's also right to hold the Mayor of London to account. I will pass on his comments directly to the Secretary of State, but I hope that the London Mayor will take firm action, get a grip of transport for London and not rely upon the cash from the government that he's requesting.
Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. All of the events of today sort of started with the Prime Minister throwing the kitchen sink at trying to preserve Owen Paterson in post, which of course the Leader of the House was instrumental in as well. The Standards Committee has produced a new code of conduct. It's ready to go. We've published it. We've also published a new procedural protocol, which would put in place, although there has been a sort of form of appeal in the past, a formal appeal through the independent expert panel, which is chaired by a High Court Judge, Sir Stephen Irwin. We can't use that, including for new cases, unless the government tables the motions, and I had hoped that we'd be doing that before the summer recess. I would urge him to think again about the last week and whether there's a means of us doing it before the summer recess, because otherwise there's a real danger that we'll be in legal jeopardy because we won't know how to deal with an individual case that might come along, which might be just as serious as that of Owen Paterson.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for the work that he's done and for the work of the committee. We had the final reports, I think, late last week, which the government is now considering. I know he's very keen to move forward, as is the government. I don't think it will be possible to have that debate before the summer recess, but what I'm happy to do is sit down with him at some point over the next week or to try and arrange a time which we can plan our way forward.
Daniel Kaczynski.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. This year alone, my right honourable friend will know that we're spending nearly £190 billion of taxpayers' money on the NHS. Spending on the health service is increasing every year as a percentage of overall government spending. We're very proud in Shropshire And my right honourable friend, the member for Ludlow, and I secured £312 million for major modernisation of our local A&E services. Not a penny of that money has been spent 4 years after we have secured it. Can we have a debate in government time about the quality and efficacy of various levels of NHS management? Because certainly in my trust, I am starting to lose confidence in them.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question and pay tribute to the work that he does holding local health authorities to account in Shropshire. He'll be aware that the government has introduced a £39 billion package through the Health and Social Care levy. That is a huge investment in our health services, but he is right to highlight that also has to go hand in hand with reform and restructure to make sure that that taxpayers' money is invested properly and is spent efficiently.
Harry Sherman.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I ask the Leader of the House if he will, of course he knows more about what's been going on in Number 10 and in the government than anyone else, but will he take seriously the fact this is a national crisis and a national emergency, and perhaps pro tem, just for the next 2 weeks and through the recess, there should be some serious cooperation between the opposition and the government front benches in order to serve the national purpose. And would he also, and I don't know, Mr Deputy Speaker, how we do this, when dear David was killed and when Joe was killed, I had the assurance that their families would be well looked after. Evidence has come to me that that isn't the case. Could we have a proper way of finding out how we look after the families of victims killed when they're working, doing their job as parliamentarians? Because what I've heard recently is not very, reflects very poorly on this House.
The House.
Well, I thank him for his question. I'm more than happy to pursue that away from the dispatch box if he wants to raise that with me privately and send me the information that he's in possession of. I think clearly there is a responsibility for us to look after families of those people who sadly were murdered brutally. I think it's also worth just reaffirming that there are support mechanisms out there for security, and I know through the Speaker's office and through the security services within the House of Commons, if any members are concerned about their own security or that of their family, there is support out there.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. At the Treasury Select Committee on the 6th of June, the now former Chancellor promised action in weeks on what he called the extraordinary profits of electricity generators, sparking significant uncertainty in renewables investment in Scotland. There is nothing in the business statement presented today which deals with this proposal. So before recess, so can the Leader of the House restore confidence and help Scotland's net zero ambitions by confirming that the current government won't go ahead with these half-baked plans?
Leader of the House.
Well, I thank the honourable lady for a question. Of course, we have announced the oil and gas levy bill, which is coming to the House very soon. So she'll have the opportunity in that debate to question the Minister at the dispatch box. But I think we can afford a little time for the new Chancellor of the Exchequer to find his feet and to come to the House. And I'm sure she'll have the opportunity to question him when he does.
Terry McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I shouldn't actually be here at the moment. I should be in the Bill Committee of the Genetic Technology Precision Breeding Bill. Unfortunately, we lost the Minister yesterday. We have a new Minister who is even now swatting up ferociously for this afternoon session, but it's an incredibly technical bill, and it's not a very well drafted bill. It's very flawed. Does the Leader of the House really think that that Minister, no disrespect to her, but that she's going to be in a position to take us through the remaining stages of committee by this afternoon?
So I thank the honourable lady for a question. The Bill Committee will meet at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I can assure her that the Minister of State in that department is very informed on this matter, is right across the detail of that, and I'm sure the Bill Committee will proceed with great speed at 2 o'clock this afternoon.
Ian Paisley.
Very much, Speaker. I welcome the fact that the business leader has not listed any business on the Northern Ireland Protocol for the 12th of July, given that there will be celebrations about the Glorious Revolution taking place on that day. And a number of Northern Ireland members would not be available, but I do welcome the fact that he has listed for 3 days, 13th, 18th and 19th. Can I confirm that as personalities are changing at the top, that the policy on this matter, the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, will not change, and it is the government's intention to complete this business by the end of this particular session? And could I recommend to him the evidence that the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee received from the renowned international law expert Professor Alan Boyle of Edinburgh Law School, where he confirmed that all of his advice to the government is that the Protocol Bill does not breach international law?
Well, I can assure the honourable gentleman that the bill will continue on the dates that have been announced. He'll be aware it is a Foreign Office bill, and the Foreign Secretary remains very much in her place, and I hope he'll be in his place to scrutinise the bill as it progresses.
Marshall Kutova.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And can I associate myself with the comments made earlier by the Leader of the House and many other members across this House on the 17th anniversary of the 7/7 terror attacks? Mr Deputy Speaker, for the good of this country, we need a functioning government, and at this precise moment, we do not have one. There are many government departments that is without ministers. And now I have met with many ministers over the past months, and also have written correspondence to them on very important matters that matter to the people of Battersea. So can the Leader of the House give me some assurance that I will get responses at the earliest opportunity and in a timely way, please?
Well, I can offer the honourable lady that assurance. There are ministers being appointed as we speak. Those vacancies will be filled, and she will get a timely response, and her constituents will receive the service that they deserve.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. In Bath, we have soaring ambulance waiting times, NHS dentists and GPs in crisis, and a cost of living emergency bringing misery to scores of my constituents. There is no functioning government left. How is it possible that the Prime Minister can continue in office, even as a caretaker, amidst the chaos that he has created himself? Will he bring forward a debate and vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister?
Well, it's good to see the honourable lady back in her place for business questions. I know she's missed a couple, and I hope she's now well. I can assure her that there is a functioning government. The government, there are a few vacancies that are currently being filled. They'll be filled very soon, and level of service will continue at the high level it has for some time.
Jake Twigg.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. For the Sensible Leader of the House, in view of the Secretary of State for Defence's comments to the Defence Select Committee this week on the ongoing situation in Ukraine, can we have an urgent debate in government time to examine the need to increase defence spending and defence personnel?
Well, the honourable gentleman will be aware of the commitment we've made for extra cash for Ukraine and for the security the security situation. I hope he would recognise that that warfare is changing, and that the requirements of the MOD have changed over the last few decades, and that's why the MOD are reviewing what their requirements are. We have a Secretary of State currently who's very much across his brief, and is very much in place and will remain so for the near future.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Before the chaos of the last 24 hours, I had been promised a meeting with the former Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities and Local Government over the issues affecting my constituents in Cardiff South and Penarth relating to fire and building safety defects, and the lack of cooperation there's been with the Welsh Government about commitments from developers that were done on an England-only basis rather than a UK-wide basis to remedy those defects. Would he be able to assist in getting me a meeting with whoever is newly appointed to that role? These are really serious issues affecting thousands of people.
Well, I don't know if the honourable gentleman is aware, but the member for Tunbridge Wells has been appointed to that Secretary of State role. I shall pass on his comments directly to him and make sure that we can arrange a meeting for him with the department as soon as possible.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. If the Prime Minister is permitted to remain in post until October following a leadership election, this means that the governance of the UK will be in a state of paralysis until that time, with over 25 ministerial vacancies and important bill committees cancelled across the House today. Indeed, it seems that the Prime Minister is still only supported by political giants such as the Honourable Lady from Mid-Bedfordshire and the Honourable Gentleman for Dumfries and Galloway. No wonder the people of Scotland are deciding in increasing numbers that they are better off taking their future into their own hands. But will the Leader of the House make a statement setting out the importance of a Prime Minister who has lost the support of his own MPs and is now unable to govern to resign immediately so that an interim Prime Minister can be appointed?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, I understand the Prime Minister is going to make a statement later, and we await that statement with anticipation to see what is said. But I can assure her that government will continue to work away. She says that a number of committees have been cancelled. Actually, some of them have just been rearranged and will continue in the usual way.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I also want to associate myself with the remarks about Seven Hounslow Council lost a wonderful social worker, Ajaro Ikiagwu, on that day. One of the key tasks of government are the basic functions that currently seem to be collapsing. For example, and just examples, the issuing of visas and passports. And members are not getting answers. So can the Leader of the House explain how the basic parliamentary tools of scrutiny will be addressed, such as answers getting written answers to questions, whether oral or written, where there are either no ministers or these ministers are so new they're going to take time to get their feet under the table?
Well, the Honourable Lady will be aware that the ministers, where there is a vacancy, those ministers will be appointed very soon, that the function of those departments will be up and running very quickly. And I can assure her that there are many talented people on the benches behind me that will be able to take up those roles. Well, they're probably all waiting by their phones, but I can assure her that once they're in place, they'll be ready to give her the level of service that she requires.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Deputy Speaker, after the wholly unsatisfactory response from the Minister this morning to the urgent question from the Shadow Home Secretary about the meeting with former KGB officer Alexander Lebedev on the 28th of April 2018 with the then Foreign Secretary, now Prime Minister, could the Leader please arrange for a fully briefed Minister to attend this House on Monday to give a statement to set out the facts of what happened and who was told, particularly in light of what appears to be a clear breach of the ministerial code and potentially a criminal offence being committed?
Into the House.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. As she made reference to, there was an urgent question this morning. There are matters of national security that are pertinent to this, and not all of those matters of national security can be vocalised from the dispatch box due to their sensitivity, but I will make sure I pass on her comments to the relevant department, and I'm sure they'll respond in due course.
Vindu Mishra.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I was pleased to recently learn that Davenport Station in my constituency is to be finally awarded access for all funding to make accessibility improvements. However, Stockport Station, which had almost 4.5 million passengers per annum pre-pandemic, still requires significant capital investment to ensure it is safe and accessible for all. It is the 5th busiest station in Greater Manchester, but unfortunately we have leaky roofs, which often cause platforms to be unsafe and lifts are out of use. If there are any ministers left in the Department for Transport, will the Leader of the House allocate government time for a debate on train stations across Greater Manchester to address these serious health and safety issues as well as accessibility issues?
Well, I pay tribute to the honourable gentleman for raising the matter. I think disability access to our stations is very important. That's why the Department of Transport have invested millions of pounds in our rail infrastructure up and down the country. He'll have the opportunity in September at Transport Questions to raise that again. I think Transport Questions on the 15th of September. But I know from my own constituency there are a number of challenges with railway stations that do need improvements to allow disability access.
Deirdre Brock.
Deputy Speaker. Open Democracy tells us 18 ministers have refused to publish official diaries of the meetings they held during the pandemic, and those include those of the Health Secretary and the Prime Minister. Yet the new Chancellor tells us we'll see evidence and transparency from the ministerial team and the Prime Minister in the future.
Can we have a statement about the importance of the government ensuring evidence and transparency in governmental business, that government ministers' diaries are made available to the public for scrutiny, and also that distinctions between official, political and personal meetings are properly defined for the future?
Mr Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady will be aware that there are very strict rules around these sorts of declarations. I don't think it is possible to publish diaries of all ministers. There are security implications in publishing specific diary engagements on a regular basis, particularly for some ministers that have security briefs. But there are very strict rules around what should be declared and the timelines of when they should be declared.
Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As we know, it's the end of days for this Prime Minister. It's also the end of days for this parliamentary session before summer recess. The Leader of the House might not have seen the Leader of the Opposition interview the BBC this morning where he said if the Conservative Party don't get rid of the Prime Minister shortly, Labour will, in the national interest, bring a no-confidence vote because this can't go on. Will the Leader of the House guarantee that the 21st of July will be the last day of this session, or will he try and bring that forward to avoid such a vote?
Yeah.
The House.
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, I've announced the business for the next 2 weeks. The House will rise on the 21st of July. We await the Prime Minister's statement this afternoon. I'm not about to preempt what he may or may not say, but I can assure the honourable gentleman that the functions of government continue and will continue to move forward.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The PCS union are opposing the closure of Toxteth Job Centre in my Liverpool Riverside constituency, along with other centres nationally, and also challenging the proposed 91,000 job cuts across the wider civil service and the attacks on pay terms and conditions across government departments. Will the Leader of the House grant an urgent debate in government time so we can scrutinise government plans to negotiate with PCS to avoid centre closures and attacks on pay and conditions?
Well, of course, the Honourable Lady is perfectly at liberty to apply for a Westminster Hall debate or an adjournment debate on that matter. I think it is worth recognising that there is huge global inflationary pressure, and we must, as a government, act responsibly with fiscal responsibility to make sure that we do not add to that inflationary pressure, and that is going to require some pay restraint across the country.
Barry Gardner.
Last week, I raised at Business Question the issue of redundancies in the Royal Mail. And I want to apologise to you, Mr Deputy Speaker, that I said there were 1,400 agreed redundancies and 900 that were in dispute. I believe I may have inadvertently misled the House in that the actual figures are 1,250 redundancies at Royal Mail that were achieved and 542 that are in dispute. The Leader of the House was good enough last week to say that he would raise the matter of the disruption to service with the Secretary of State for Business, who I understand is still in his post. Has he done so? And if so, are we going to get the urgent statement from the Business Secretary about the disruption that is currently happening to postal services across the country?
Leader of the House.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. The direct answer is yes, I have written to the Secretary of State. I hope he will get a copy of that, if he's not already, of my letter in his inbox very soon. I know Royal Mail have also written to him, I think, directly, but I've not had a response yet from the Secretary of State. If I get one before he does, then I shall forward it to him.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Greater than the crisis in Downing Street is the crisis we're seeing currently in the Donbass and across Ukraine. However, the Prime Minister remaining in office is playing into Putin's hands and undermining President Zelensky. So will he convey my concern and that of many other members to the Prime Minister that he can't continue in office if he wants to support the people of Ukraine, and therefore bring a statement to this House about the impact of his behaviours on our policy?
Leader of the House.
Well, I mean, I gently say to the Honourable, number one, we await the Prime Minister's statement this afternoon. I don't want to preempt what he may or may not say, but I think most people in the country would recognise that the Prime Minister has been the leading voice in taking the fight back to Putin and supporting Ukraine in the world. He's shown great global leadership on this matter, and if it wasn't for this Prime Minister and his efforts, Russia would now be in Kiev and I think probably across the whole of Ukraine.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, the Yazidi Justice Committee published their report entitled State Responsibility and the Genocide of the Yazidis. Murder and mutilation of women, families, lives destroyed forever. It is undoubtedly, Mr Deputy Speaker, difficult reading. This report highlighted the duty of governments to prevent genocide occurring when a high risk has been identified. Given the situation in Afghanistan,
I'm going to be here. Are you okay behind me? I'll try to stay as low as I can.
Good, okay. Toby, good?
One, two. Are you guys happy with the audio? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Good stuff? Good stuff.
This is an audio test through the lectern. Hopefully the voice is audible through the speakers. This is an audio test from the lectern. Hopefully this is audible through the speakers as well. This is a test through the speakers as well as the distribution amplifier.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you. It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister. And I've agreed with Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of our backbench MPs, that the process of choosing that new leader should begin now. And the timetable will be announced next week. And I've today appointed a cabinet to serve, as I will, until a new leader is in place. So I want to say to the millions of people who voted for us in 2019, many of them voting Conservative for the first time, thank you for that incredible mandate, the biggest Conservative majority since 1987, the biggest share of the vote since 1979. And the reason I have fought so hard in the last few days to continue to deliver that mandate in person was not just because I wanted to do so, but because I felt it was my job, my duty, my obligation to you to continue to do what we promised in 2019. And of course, I'm immensely proud of the achievements of this government, from getting Brexit done to settling our relations with the continent for over half a century, reclaiming the power for this country to make its own laws in Parliament, getting us all through the pandemic, delivering the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, the fastest exit from lockdown, and in the last few months, leading the West in standing up to Putin's aggression in Ukraine. And let me say now to the people of Ukraine that I know that we in the UK will continue to back your fight for freedom for as long as it takes. And at the same time, in this country, we've been pushing forward a vast program of investment in infrastructure and skills and technology, the biggest in a century, because if I have one insight into human beings, it is that genius and talent and enthusiasm and imagination are evenly distributed throughout the population, but opportunity is not. And that's why we must keep levelling up, keep unleashing the potential of every part of the United Kingdom. And if we can do that in this country, we will be the most prosperous in Europe. And in the last few days, I've tried to persuade my colleagues that it would be eccentric to change governments when we're delivering so much, and when we have such a vast mandate, and when we're actually only a handful of points behind in the polls, even in mid-term after quite a few months of pretty relentless sledging, and when the economic scene is so difficult domestically and internationally. And I regret not to have been successful in those arguments, and of course it's painful not to be able to see through so many ideas and projects myself. But as we've seen at Westminster, the herd instinct is powerful. When the herd moves, it moves. And my friends, in politics, no one is remotely indispensable. And our brilliant and Darwinian system will produce another leader equally committed to taking this country forward through tough times, not just helping families to get through it, but changing and improving the way we do things, cutting burdens on businesses and families, and yes, cutting taxes, because that is the way to generate the growth and the income we need to pay for great public services. And to that new leader, I say, whoever he or she may be, I say I will give you as much support as I can. And to you, the British public, I know that there will be many people who are relieved, and perhaps quite a few who will also be disappointed. And I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks. I want to thank Carrie and our children and all the members of my family who have had to put up with so much for so long. I want to thank the peerless British civil service for all the help and support that you have given our police, our emergency services, and of course our fantastic NHS, who at critical moment helped to extend my own period in office, as well as our armed services and our agencies that are so admired around the world, and our indefatigable Conservative Party members and supporters, whose selfless campaigning makes our democracy possible. I want to thank the wonderful staff here at Chequers, here at Number 10, and of course at Chequers, and our fantastic prop force detectives, the one group, by the way, who never leak. Above all, I want to thank you, the British public, for the immense privilege that you have given me. And I want you to know that from now on until the new Prime Minister is in place, your interests will be served and the government of the country will be carried on. Being Prime Minister is an education in itself. I've travelled to every part of the United Kingdom, and in addition to the beauty of our natural world, I found so many people possessed of such boundless British originality and so willing to tackle old problems in new ways that I know that even if things can sometimes seem dark now, our future together is golden. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Okay, and they're in Downing Street, are they? Okay.